You wake up to the sound of your own breath crackling in the air above your face. Your blanket isn't a blanket at all, but a rough woolen cloak that smells like wet dog, yesterday's sweat, and the kind of regret that comes from volunteering for military service during peacetime. The ground beneath you is harder than your mother's disapproval, and about twice as unforgiving. Welcome to Germania in the dead of winter, 9 AD, where the trees are taller than Roman aqueducts and significantly more hostile. 24 hours ago, you were probably dodging tax collectors in some dusty Italian village, or selling questionable fish in the Forum Romanum. You had opinions about politics, preferences about wine, and a general assumption that your biggest daily challenge would involve avoiding eye contact with creditors. Now you're a Roman legionnaire in the 17th Legion, though you don't know yet that this particular number will become cursed in Roman military history. The Empire needed bodies, and your body happened to be in the wrong tavern at the right time when the recruitment officers came through with their inspiring speeches about glory, citizenship, and regular meals. What they failed to mention was that some of those meals would be eaten, while your fingers were too numb to feel the spoon, in weather that makes polar bears reconsider their life choices. Listen to the wind, cutting through the camp, like a knife through warm butter that's been left out in a blizzard. It carries the scent of pine needles, frozen earth, and what you're beginning to recognize as the distinctive aroma of impending doom. Somewhere in those dark forests, Germanic warriors are probably watching Roman soldiers stumble around in the cold, laughing at how civilized people handle a little winter weather. Your centurion, a grizzled veteran named Lucius, whose face looks like it was carved from granite by someone with anger management issues, told you this campaign would be finished by autumn. It's now deep winter, and the only thing finished is your faith in military leadership's ability to predict anything more complex than sunrise. The Germanic tribes, it turns out, don't follow Roman tactical manuals or respect Roman timelines. The interesting thing about waking up in a Roman military camp during Germanic winter is how quickly your priorities reorganize themselves. Yesterday you might have worried about whether your toga was properly draped or if your hair looked fashionable. Today your primary concern is whether your toes still exist inside your boots, and whether that strange tingling sensation in your fingers indicates circulation or the early stages of frostbite. But here's what's really trying to kill you this morning, not Germanic warriors with their oversized axes and creative approaches to Roman anatomy, but the cold itself. This isn't the dramatic, cinematically beautiful kind of cold where heroes deliver inspiring speeches while their breath forms perfect clouds. This is the kind of cold that makes your teeth ache just from existing, that turns simple biological functions into survival challenges. Your gear weighs approximately the same as a small cart horse, but it's the only thing standing between you and becoming a Roman popsicle with delusions of military grandeur. Mail armour that clinks with every movement, a shield that could double as a door, a gladius sharp enough to shave with it if you could feel your face, javelins for throwing at people who really don't want them, and enough additional equipment to stock a moderately successful blacksmith shop. The other legionnaires around you look like they're auditioning for a theatrical production about miserable people in uncomfortable situations. Some are from sunny Spain, where winter means wearing a light cloak and complaining about morning frost. Others come from warm African provinces, where the biggest weather concern is avoiding sunburn. They all signed up to conquer barbarians in reasonable climates, not to become barbarians themselves, just to maintain core body temperature. Around the camp, soldiers are going through the morning routine, with the mechanical precision of people who have learned that military discipline doesn't pause for personal discomfort. Someone is always sharpening a weapon, because dull blades are useless against Germanic warriors who prefer their Romans pre-sliced. Someone else is always complaining about the food, which has the consistency of leather and roughly the same nutritional value. The centurions pace through the organised chaos like wolves in armour, maintaining order through creative profanity and the implied threat of extra duties. You check your equipment with the systematic attention that Roman training has drilled into your bones. Gladius sharp enough to split Germanic skulls, present and accounted for, shield properly secured and ready to stop axes the size of small trees, check will to live and fight for the glory of Rome. That particular item requires daily renewal, and this morning it feels somewhat back-ordered. The Germanic forests stretch endlessly in every direction, dark and forbidding like nature's own haunted house designed by someone with a particularly twisted imagination. These aren't the pleasant groves and olive orchards of the Mediterranean world. These are trees so massive they seem to scrape the belly of heaven itself, their branches interwoven so thickly that even at midday, the forest floor remains in perpetual twilight where anything could be hiding. Somewhere in those woods, barbarian warriors are watching Roman soldiers struggle with weather that their ancestors have survived for countless generations. They're probably taking bets on how long civilized people can maintain their discipline when nature stops cooperating with imperial ambitions. Their smart money is probably on not very long, but then again, Romans have a history of proving smart money wrong through sheer institutional stubbornness. The horn sounds across the camp with all the melodic charm of a dying elephant with respiratory problems, which means it's time to transform from individual Romans trying not to freeze to death into a coordinated military machine capable of marching through conditions that would shut down modern highways. You strap on your pack, which has mysteriously gained weight overnight, possibly through the accumulation of ice crystals or maybe just spite. Your mail armour, which seemed reasonably comfortable when you first put it on in warmer climates, now feels like wearing a constellation of tiny icicles that shift and clink with every movement. Each ring of iron has become a miniature conductor of cold, channeling Germanic winter directly into your torso with the efficiency of Roman engineering applied to making you miserable. The padding underneath helps, but not enough to make you forget that you're essentially wearing a wearable refrigerator. Falling into formation requires a level of coordination that's impressive when you consider that most of your fellow soldiers can barely feel their feet, let alone use them for precise military movements. But Roman training runs deeper than surface discomfort. Your body remembers how to stand in line, how to maintain proper intervals, how to present arms even when your arms feel like they belong to someone else entirely. The centurion walks the line with the predatory grace of someone who has survived more winter campaigns than he cares to remember, checking equipment, posture, and the general state of woman military bearing among soldiers who are actively questioning their life choices. His own breath forms clouds in the frigid air, but his voice carries the kind of authority that suggests winter weather is merely another factor to be managed through proper discipline and creative profanity. Around you, the legion organizes itself into the marching formation that has conquered half the known world through systematic application of coordinated violence and superior logistics. 20,000 men arranging themselves into centuries, cohorts, and tactical units despite weather conditions that would challenge a penguin's patience. It's like watching an enormous armoured organism prepare to move through hostile territory. Listen to the sounds of a Roman army preparing to march, the scrape and clink of mail armour being adjusted, the thud of shields being positioned properly, the systematic checking of weapons and equipment, the low murmur of soldiers confirming their place in formation. Somewhere, a mule brays with what sounds like editorial commentary on the wisdom of winter campaigns. The mule may have a point. Your feet, encased in leather boots with hobnailed soles designed for traction on Roman roads, now face the challenge of Germanic terrain, covered in snow, ice, and the kind of frozen mud that has the consistency of concrete mixed with malice. Each step becomes a negotiation between forward progress and remaining upright, between maintaining military bearing and not falling flat on your face in front of your centurion. The interesting thing about Roman military equipment in winter conditions is how every piece serves multiple purposes beyond its obvious function. Your cloak isn't just protection against the elements, it's emergency blanket, windbreak and camouflage all wrapped into one wool package. Your shield isn't just for deflecting Germanic weapons, it's also a windbreak, a makeshift stretcher, and in extreme circumstances, a shovel for digging through snow. But the real weight you're carrying isn't measured in pounds of iron and leather. It's the psychological burden of being very far from home, surrounded by an environment that views your continued existence as a personal challenge to overcome. The Germanic winter doesn't just test your physical endurance, it tests your mental resilience, your faith in Roman superiority, and your confidence that civilized people can triumph over uncivilized conditions through superior organization and equipment. Your gladius hangs at your side with reassuring weight, a reminder that you're not just a tourist struggling with bad weather, but a professional soldier equipped with the finest weapons Roman metallurgy can produce. The blade was forged in workshops that have perfected the art of turning iron into instruments capable of carving the Empire's will into resistant reality. But right now, it feels more like a very expensive security blanket than a tool of conquest. The pack on your back contains everything needed to maintain Roman military efficiency in hostile territory. Cooking pots, spare clothing, toolkit, personal items, emergency rations, and enough miscellaneous equipment to establish a small civilization wherever the legion happens to stop for the night. Romans don't just march through enemy territory, They carry their entire logistical infrastructure with them. Germanic winter affects your equipment in ways that Mediterranean campaigns never prepared you for. Metal becomes brittle, leather stiffens, wool compresses into felt-like density that provides less insulation than it should. Your sword belt, which fit perfectly in warm weather, now has to accommodate extra clothing layers that make you feel like you're wearing someone else's armour. Everything requires constant adjustment and maintenance just to remain functional. The other soldiers in your century move with the controlled efficiency of men who have learned that complaining about conditions doesn't change them, but failing to adapt to them can be fatal. Veterans like Marcus, who has survived 3 Germanic campaigns, share knowledge about equipment, modification, how to wrap sword hilts with cloth to prevent bare skin from freezing to metal, how to pack spare socks to rotate through wet and dry pairs, how to modify shield grips to accommodate numb fingers. As the Legion begins to move, you feel the weight of Roman expectations settling over the formation like an invisible but very real burden. You're not just individual soldiers struggling with harsh conditions, you're representatives of Roman civilization demonstrating that disciplined organisation can triumph over any obstacle nature or barbarians can present. The weight of that responsibility is heavier than any physical equipment. The Legion moves forward like a mechanical serpent made of steel, leather, and systematically controlled human misery, each century maintaining its position despite terrain that seems personally offended by the presence of civilized people. You fall into the rhythm that Roman training has embedded in your muscles. Left foot, right foot, maintain interval, keep formation. Ignore the fact that your toes may have achieved independence from the rest of your circulatory system. Your first steps onto the Germanic winter landscape proper teach you lessons that no military manual bothered to include. The snow isn't just cold, it's actively malevolent, finding ways to seep into every gap in your equipment despite your best efforts at winterization. It creeps over the tops of your boots, works its way under your cloak, and somehow manages to find skin that you thought was adequately protected. The path, such as it exists, winds through forests so dense and dark that they seem designed by someone with strong opinions about Romans and how unwelcome they are in Germanic territory. These trees have been growing here since before Rome was even a collection of hills beside the Tiber, and they radiate the kind of ancient hostility that suggests they remember when this land belonged exclusively to bears, wolves, and people who knew how to survive winter without requiring a supply train longer than most Italian rivers. Listen to the sounds of 20,000 Romans learning to march through Germanic winter, the crunch of hobnailed boots breaking through snow crust, the jingle and clink of equipment adjusting to new rhythms, the controlled breathing of soldiers who are discovering that every exhale costs precious body heat. Someone behind you is maintaining morale through creative Latin profanity that would make a dockworker blush. His commentary on the weather, the terrain, and the general wisdom of winter campaigns demonstrates a vocabulary that's both impressive and thoroughly inappropriate for mixed company. The cold attacks your body systematically, starting with the extremities and working inward like a very patient predator that understands Roman anatomy better than Roman military medicine does. Your fingers lose sensation first, even inside leather gloves that seemed adequate in milder conditions. Your toes follow, becoming abstract concepts rather than functional body parts. Your face develops that peculiar numbness that makes you wonder if you're still making appropriate facial expressions, or if you've been grimacing unconsciously for the past hour. But Romans adapt, because adaptation is what Romans do when faced with obstacles that can't be conquered through direct application of organised violence. You learn to generate warmth through controlled movement, swinging your arms in rhythm with marching, flexing your fingers inside gloves, rotating your shoulders to maintain circulation. It's like a dance designed by military engineers for people who need to stay warm while carrying enough equipment to stock a small armoury. The Germanic winter landscape stretches endlessly ahead, rolling hills covered in forests that look like nature's own fortress walls. This isn't the Mediterranean world of olive groves, sunny hillsides and weather that cooperates with human ambitions. This is a land where winter rules for half the year and considers Roman presence an amusing but temporary aberration that will be corrected through systematic application of cold, wind, and the occasional blizzard. Your breath forms clouds so thick they practically have substance, little white puffs that dissipate slowly in air, so cold it seems to have abandoned being a gas in favour of being a barely liquid form of crystallised hostility. The inside of your nose starts to freeze with each inhalation, creating tiny ice formations that melt and refreeze with every respiratory cycle. It's like breathing through a miniature ice cave that's being constantly remodeled by your own body heat. The psychological impact of your first real march through Germanic winter settles over your mind like a heavy blanket made of doubt and discomfort. This isn't the glorious conquest of barbarian territories that recruitment officers described with such enthusiasm back in Rome. This is a grinding test of endurance against an environment that doesn't care about Roman military superiority, doesn't respect Roman engineering, and certainly doesn't acknowledge Roman rights to march through Germanic territory just because some general decided it would be strategically advantageous. Around you, other soldiers are having their own private negotiations with Germanic winter, each man discovering personal limits and developing individual coping strategies. Some march with mechanical precision, using discipline to override discomfort. Others adopt a more philosophical approach, accepting misery as part of the job and finding grim humour in their situation. A few look like they're questioning fundamental life decisions and wondering if desertion in Germanic winter would actually be worse than continuing this march. The veterans, recognisable by their weathered faces and systematic approach to equipment management, share wisdom gained through previous winter campaigns. They know how to wrap their feet to prevent frostbite, how to eat snow without lowering core body temperature dangerously, how to recognise the early signs of hypothermia in themselves and their tent mates. This knowledge passes through the ranks like valuable currency, traded for similar survival tips and mutual support. Your centurion rides past the formation periodically, checking on unit cohesion and individual soldier condition, with the professional assessment of someone whose job depends on maintaining combat effectiveness regardless of environmental conditions. His horse looks significantly warmer than the marching soldiers, a fact that several legionnaires have noted, with the kind of attention to detail that suggests they're considering career changes. As the morning progresses into what passes for midday in Germanic winter, where the sun provides light but precious little warmth, you begin to understand that this campaign isn't just about conquering territory or defeating barbarian armies. It's about proving that Roman discipline and organisation can triumph over any challenge nature presents, that civilised people can endure conditions that would break lesser civilisations, and that the Empire's reach extends even into places where the weather itself fights against Roman presence. The first thing Germanic winter teaches you about combat readiness is that metal in extreme cold develops a personality disorder. Your gladius, that marvel of Roman metallurgy that could slice through Germanic shields like parchment in reasonable weather, now feels like you're carrying a blade-shaped icicle with delusions of being a weapon. The bronze fittings on your armour conduct cold with the efficiency that Roman engineering usually reserves for more helpful applications. You discover this during the morning weapons inspection, when your centurion orders the traditional display of arms that demonstrates Roman military preparedness to any barbarians who might be watching from the tree line. Drawing your sword becomes an exercise in negotiation between frozen leather sheaths, numb fingers, and metal that seems determined to stick to anything it touches, including the skin of your palm when you forget to keep your gloves on. Marcus, your tentmate and veteran of previous Germanic campaigns, shares the first rule of winter warfare: never touch metal with bare skin unless you enjoy leaving pieces of yourself attached to your equipment. He demonstrates proper winter weapon handling, with the systematic attention of someone who has learned these lessons through personal experience involving skin grafts and creative Roman military medicine. The mail armour that protects your torso from Germanic weapons also conducts cold directly into your core with the dedicated efficiency of a Roman aqueduct, except instead of bringing clean water to cities, it's bringing freezing temperatures directly to your internal organs. Each ring of iron becomes a tiny ambassador of Germanic winter, ensuring that no part of your torso escapes the educational experience of slowly freezing to death while remaining combat ready. Listen to the sounds of a Roman sentry preparing weapons for potential combat in sub-freezing conditions, the scrape of metal on leather as swords are drawn and checked, the clink of mail being adjusted to accommodate additional insulation layers, the systematic tapping of spear points against shield rims to break off accumulated ice. Someone is having a heated discussion with his javelin about its failure to remain properly balanced after frost build-up. The javelin is winning the argument. Your shield, that masterpiece of layered wood, leather and bronze that has turned aside barbarian weapons across 3 continents, now weighs significantly more than regulation specifications due to accumulated ice and snow. The bronze boss in the centre has become a focal point for cold that radiates inward through the entire structure, making shield work an exercise in controlled hypothermia. But the extra weight also means extra impact when you need to use it as a weapon. Germanic winter affects different weapons differently, creating a hierarchy of reliability that doesn't match traditional Roman military doctrine. Slings become nearly useless when the cords freeze and lose flexibility. Bows require constant maintenance to prevent the wood from cracking in extreme cold. Javelins develop ice buildup that changes their balance and flight characteristics. Only swords and spears remain fully functional, assuming you can maintain enough sensation in your hands to use them properly. The interesting challenge of winter combat preparation is maintaining weapon functionality while keeping your hands warm enough to use those weapons effectively. Roman military training never covered the specific technique required to draw a sword quickly while wearing thick gloves, or how to maintain proper spear grip when your fingers are too numb to feel the weapon shaft. These are skills you develop through necessity and hope you never need to use in actual combat. But Germanic warriors have grown up in this climate, learned to fight in conditions that Romans consider barely survivable. They use weapons designed specifically for winter warfare, axes with longer handles to accommodate thick gloves, spears with modified grips, shields constructed to function in sub-freezing temperatures. When they attack Roman formations, they'll have every environmental advantage that home territory provides. Your pilum, that ingenious Roman javelin designed to penetrate enemy shields and bend on impact to prevent reuse, requires special attention in Germanic winter. The iron shaft becomes brittle in extreme cold, the wooden handle contracts and loosens the binding, and accumulated ice changes the weapon's balance in ways that affect accuracy and penetration. You spend extra time each morning checking the binding and clearing ice buildup. The psychological aspect of weapon maintenance in winter conditions affects combat readiness in ways that military manuals don't address. When your primary means of staying alive requires constant attention just to remain functional, confidence in your equipment decreases proportionally to the amount of time spent preventing it from freezing solid. Trust in your weapons becomes a daily renewal process, rather than a given. Roman military engineering responds to Germanic winter challenges with typical systematic efficiency. Weapon oil gets modified with additives that prevent freezing. Leather wrapping gets applied to metal surfaces that soldiers need to touch. Spare parts become more important when extreme temperatures cause equipment failure at rates that Mediterranean campaigns never experienced. Every piece of gear requires redundancy and backup systems. Your centurion demonstrates proper winter combat stance, showing how thick clothing layers and numb extremities affect traditional Roman fighting techniques. Footwork becomes more cautious on icy ground. Shieldwork requires adjustments for reduced arm mobility. Sword techniques get modified to accommodate gloves that reduce tactile feedback. It's like learning to fight while wearing someone else's body that's been stuffed with wool and frozen partially solid. The veterans share combat wisdom specific to Germanic winter conditions. How to prevent your sword from freezing in its sheath, how to maintain spear grip when your hands are too cold to feel properly, how to use accumulated snow and ice on your shield as additional protection against Germanic weapons. This knowledge represents the difference between combat effectiveness and becoming barbarian target practice. As morning weapon preparation concludes, you understand that Germanic winter isn't just an environmental challenge to be endured until spring, it's a fundamental change in the nature of warfare itself. Combat in these conditions requires different skills, different tactics, and different expectations about what Roman military superiority means when nature itself fights on the enemy's side. Roman military doctrine assumes that soldiers can maintain combat readiness indefinitely, transitioning from march formation to battle line within minutes of encountering enemy forces. Germanic winter introduces variables that classical tactical manuals never considered. What happens when your soldiers are so cold they can't feel their weapons? When terrain conditions make standard formations impossible, when the environment itself becomes more dangerous than enemy action. You learn this during the first combat drill conducted in proper Germanic winter conditions, when your sentry practices formation changes on ground covered with snow that conceals rocks, holes, and patches of ice designed by nature to embarrass Roman military precision. The neat geometric patterns that work so well on Mediterranean battlefields become suggestions rather than requirements, when maintaining formation means choosing between tactical perfection and avoiding broken ankles. The testudo formation, that famous Roman turtle where overlapping shields create mobile protection against enemy missiles, become significantly more challenging when accumulated snow and ice make shields heavier and more unwieldy. The soldier beside you struggles to maintain proper shield overlap while wearing enough layers to prevent hypothermia, creating gaps in the formation that Germanic spears could exploit if this were actual combat, rather than just another educational opportunity provided by winter warfare. Listen to the sounds of Romans learning to fight in Germanic winter. The scrape and slide of hobnailed boots searching for purchase on icy ground. The modified commands that centurions use when standard formations require adjustment for environmental conditions. The controlled breathing of soldiers who are discovering that vigorous physical activity in sub-freezing temperatures creates its own special challenges for maintaining both warmth and combat effectiveness. Your centurion demonstrates modified combat techniques with the patience of someone who understands that soldier survival depends on adapting Roman tactics to Germanic realities. Sword work gets adjusted for reduced mobility in heavy clothing. Shield positions change to accommodate the fact that numb arms can't maintain classical stances for extended periods. Spear techniques require modifications when thick gloves reduce tactile feedback from weapon handling. The interesting thing about combat training in winter conditions is how it reveals the difference between theoretical knowledge and practical application. You've drilled sword techniques hundreds of times in mild weather, but drawing your gladius quickly while wearing thick gloves over hands that can barely feel the weapon grip is a completely different skill set. Roman military training adapts to incorporate these realities through systematic practice and creative profanity. Germanic winter also changes the timing of combat operations in ways that affect tactical planning. Dawn attacks become less effective when dawn arrives late and provides insufficient light for complex maneuvers. Evening battles become impossible when both darkness falls early and torches are impractical in wind and snow. The window for effective military action shrinks to a few hours of adequate daylight, compress the entire operational tempo. But Romans approach winter warfare with the same systematic methodology they apply to engineering projects and provincial administration. Problems get identified, solutions get developed, and new procedures get implemented through repetitive training until they become automatic responses. Your century practices winter combat techniques with the same dedication that built roads across 3 continents and aqueducts that still function centuries later. The psychological challenge of maintaining combat readiness in Germanic winter conditions affects unit morale in ways that require active management by centurions and optios. Soldiers who can't feel their feet properly question their ability to execute complex maneuvers. Warriors who need constant attention just to prevent frostbite wonderabouts. Their effectiveness in actual combat situations. Confidence requires daily renewal through successful completion of training exercises. Your equipment loadout gets modified for winter combat operations through systematic trial and error, guided by the veteran experience. Extra socks become more important than extra javelins. Weapon oil that doesn't freeze takes priority over decorative armor polish. Emergency fire-starting materials get elevated to essential equipment status. Every piece of gear gets evaluated for its contribution to survival first, combat effectiveness second. Roman military medicine adapts to address winter-specific combat injuries that Mediterranean campaigns never encountered. Frostbite becomes as serious as sword wounds. Hypothermia requires the same immediate attention as bleeding. Combat medics learn to treat injuries caused by slipping on ice with the same systematic approach they use for treating injuries caused by Germanic weapons. The enemy now includes the weather itself. The veterans share wisdom about maintaining alertness during long periods of cold weather guard duty, when the combination of darkness, monotony, and gradual heat loss can compromise the vigilance that keeps camp secure. Techniques for staying awake when your body wants to conserve energy through decreased activity. Methods for maintaining visual acuity when your eyes water constantly in cold wind. Strategies for keeping weapon-bearing hands functional during extended exposure to freezing temperatures. Your sentry practices rapid deployment from marching formation to combat readiness while wearing full winter gear, learning to balance the speed required for tactical surprise with the deliberate movement necessary to avoid injury on treacherous footing. It's like learning to dance while wearing armor and carrying weapons, except the dance floor is covered in ice, and the music is the sound of your centurion questioning your intelligence, ancestry, and general fitness for military service. As winter combat training progresses, you begin to understand that Germanic campaigns aren't just about conquering territory or defeating barbarian armies. They're about proving that Roman military culture can adapt to any environment, overcome any obstacle, and maintain effectiveness under conditions that would render other armies non-functional. Winter becomes another enemy to defeat through discipline, organisation, and systematic application of Roman problem-solving methodology. The morning brings news that scouts have spotted Germanic warbands moving through the forest to your north, and suddenly the abstract concept of winter warfare becomes a very concrete concern about staying alive while people with axes try to turn you into Roman hamburger in weather conditions that make simple movement a challenge. Your Centurion's briefing covers tactical considerations that military manuals never addressed. How to fight effectively when you can't feel your weapon. Grip properly. Germanic tribal warfare in winter operates according to rules that Romans find both alien and disturbingly effective. Barbarian warriors don't maintain permanent formations or follow classical tactical doctrine. They appear out of the forest like angry ghosts, strike with weapons designed for Germanic conditions, then disappear back into terrain they've known since childhood. It's guerrilla warfare perfected by people who consider winter weather a strategic ally, rather than an obstacle to overcome. You check your gear with the heightened attention that comes from knowing today might involve actual combat, rather than just training exercises designed to keep Romans functional in hostile weather. Your gladius slides smoothly in its sheath despite the cold, thanks to oil formulated specifically for Germanic conditions. Your shield straps are properly adjusted to accommodate the thick layers needed for winter warmth. Your javelins are balanced and ready, though their effectiveness in snow and wind remains theoretical. The terrain around your current position offers advantages and disadvantages that change constantly as weather conditions modify the tactical landscape. Snow conceals obstacles and deadfalls that could disrupt Roman formations. Ice makes footing uncertain for disciplined maneuvers that depend on predictable movement. Wind affects javelin accuracy and visibility. Even the trees become tactical factors when their branches are loaded with snow that could avalanche onto fighting soldiers at inconvenient moments. Listen to the sounds of Romans preparing for possible winter combat. The systematic checking of equipment carried out with extra thoroughness. The quiet discussions between veterans about Germanic fighting techniques in snow conditions. The controlled activity of soldiers who understand that their next fight might be conducted in an environment where nature itself fights against Roman tactical superiority. Roman military intelligence about Germanic winter warfare capabilities comes primarily from survivors of previous engagements, and their reports paint a picture of enemy adaptations that exploit environmental conditions Romans still struggle to master. Barbarian weapons work better in extreme cold. Germanic warriors move more effectively through snow and ice. Their knowledge of local terrain gives them advantages that Roman maps and engineering can't overcome through superior organisation alone. But Romans also possess advantages that Germanic warriors lack. Discipline that maintains unit cohesion under stress, equipment designed and manufactured to standardised specifications, tactical training that emphasises coordination over individual prowess, and logistical systems that support sustained operations even in hostile territory. The question becomes whether Roman advantages can overcome the handicap of fighting in an environment where the enemy has every natural benefit. Your sentry takes position in a defensive formation that balances Roman tactical doctrine with the practical realities of Germanic winter terrain. Shield walls become more flexible to accommodate uneven footing. Spear positions get adjusted for reduced visibility in snow and forest conditions. Communication systems rely more heavily on visual signals and horn calls that can penetrate wind noise and the sound-deadening effect of snow-covered landscape. The psychological preparation for winter combat involves accepting that this battle, if it comes, will be unlike anything Roman training anticipated. You won't be fighting on neat Mediterranean battlefields with clear lines of engagement and predictable terrain. You'll be fighting in conditions where nature actively assists the enemy, where Roman advantages become liabilities, and where survival depends as much on adapting to environmental challenges as on superior weapons and tactics. Germanic war cries echo through the forest, distant but definitely moving closer, carrying across the winter landscape with an eerie quality that snow and cold give to all sounds. The barbarians aren't hiding their approach, which suggests either supreme confidence in their ability to defeat Romans in winter conditions, or tactical knowledge about Germanic terrain that makes concealment unnecessary for achieving surprise. Your hands check weapon positions automatically, muscle memory from countless drills overriding the conscious awareness that those hands are too cold to provide reliable tactile feedback about grip security or weapon balance. Roman training runs deeper than surface discomfort, deeper than environmental challenges, deeper than the psychological stress of facing combat in conditions that favour the enemy. Your body knows how to fight even when your mind questions whether effective combat is possible. The veterans share last-minute tactical wisdom specific to Germanic winter engagements, how to maintain formation, cohesion when visibility is limited by blowing snow, how to use accumulated snowpack as temporary fortification, how to prevent weapons from becoming useless due to ice build-up during extended combat. This knowledge represents generations of German adaptation to conditions that classical military theory never contemplated. Roman officers coordinate defensive preparations with the systematic efficiency that has made Roman armies effective across 3 continents and in every climate from African deserts to British fog. But today's coordination must account for variables that desert and temperate warfare never introduced. Soldiers whose reaction time is slowed by cold, equipment whose reliability is compromised by extreme temperatures, and terrain that changes tactical possibilities with every gust of wind-blown snow. As Germanic warbands continue their approach through winter forest, you realise that this engagement will test more than just Roman military capability against barbarian warriors. It will test Roman civilization's ability to project power into environments where nature itself opposes that projection, where the weather fights on the enemy's side, and where victory requires defeating both human opponents and climatic conditions that challenge the fundamental assumptions of Mediterranean military culture. You wake to the sound of Marcus systematically cursing in 3 languages while trying to coax life into the charcoal heating bowl that kept you both alive through another Germanic night. His commentary on the parentage, intelligence, and general moral character of charcoal that refuses to cooperate includes creative profanity that would impress dock workers and embarrass philosophers. The charcoal, predictably, remains unimpressed by rhetoric and continues its passive resistance to combustion. The interior of your tent has accumulated a thin layer of frost overnight, your breath and body heat having condensed and frozen on the leather walls in patterns that look like nature's own attempt at decorative art, beautiful in a way that reminds you how close to death you sleep every night in Germanic winter. The frost will melt once Marcus achieves victory over the heating bowl, but for now it serves as a crystalline reminder of just how much your survival depends on Roman engineering and systematic fire management. Your first conscious thought, after noting that you're still alive, involves checking your extremities for signs of frostbite or complete loss of sensation. Toes, present and accounted for, though their precise location within your boots remains somewhat theoretical. Fingers, functional enough to grip objects, assuming those objects don't require fine motor control. Face, still attached, though your beard has collected enough ice overnight to qualify as personal armour against Germanic wind. The morning routine in Germanic winter begins with the systematic process of convincing your body that movement is preferable to the gradual hypothermia that comes from remaining stationary in sub-freezing temperatures. You flex your joints methodically, working circulation back into extremities that have spent the night conserving core body heat by sacrificing peripheral comfort. It's like negotiating with your own anatomy to remain functional for another day. Listen to the sounds of Roman soldiers beginning another day of winter survival. The scrape of metal on flint as fires get started throughout the camp, the systematic coughing that comes from breathing cold air all night, the creative approaches to personal hygiene that cold weather necessitates, the quiet conversations between tent mates comparing the relative misery of their respective sleeping experiences. Someone nearby has achieved fire and is celebrating with enthusiasm that suggests he wasn't entirely confident about the outcome. The process of getting dressed for Germanic winter involves layering techniques that turn your body into a walking textile experiment designed by people who prioritize survival over mobility or dignity. First, the tunic that spent the night inside your bedroll to prevent it from freezing solid. Then the wool undergarments that provide insulation without restricting movement too severely. Next, the outer tunic that offers wind resistance and additional thermal protection. Finally, the cloak that serves as your primary defense against weather that considers Roman presence a personal insult. Your equipment requires morning maintenance rituals that Mediterranean campaigns never demanded. Weapon oil must be checked and refreshed to prevent metal from becoming brittle in extreme cold. Leather straps need manipulation to restore flexibility lost to overnight freezing. Mail armour requires inspection for ice buildup that could restrict movement or compromise protection. Every piece of gear demands attention just to remain functional for another day of winter warfare. The systematic checking of personal supplies reveals the daily mathematics of Germanic winter survival, how much firewood remains versus how many cold hours lie ahead, whether food supplies will provide adequate calories for maintaining body heat, if water reserves are still liquid, or have joined the ranks of equipment that requires thawing before use. Every calculation involves balancing current consumption against future needs in an environment where running out of resources means death. Marcus demonstrates veteran techniques for morning personal care that preserve both hygiene and core body temperature. Washing becomes a strategic operation involving heated water, minimal exposure time, and systematic coverage of essential areas without creating opportunities for hypothermia through excessive heat loss. It's like performing surgery on yourself, except the surgery involves staying clean enough to prevent disease while avoiding frostbite through overexposure to water and air. Your breath forms clouds so thick they practically qualify as weather systems of their own, miniature fog banks that dissipate slowly in air, so cold it seems to have abandoned being a gas, in favour of existing as barely liquid crystalline hostility. Speaking becomes an exercise in thermal management, every word costing precious body heat while providing necessary communication with tent mates and sentry members. The morning meal preparation involves techniques that transform standard Roman rations into something that provides both nutrition and desperately needed warmth. Porridge becomes the foundation of Germanic winter dining not because of its culinary excellence, but because hot food provides core body heat while delivering calories needed for maintaining thermal regulation. It's functional cuisine designed by people who understand that taste preferences become secondary to survival requirements. Roman military discipline maintains morning routines despite conditions that would excuse almost any deviation from standard procedure. Soldiers still shave, though with heated water and systematic attention to preventing razors from freezing to facial skin. Equipment still gets inspected according to regulation standards, though with additional attention to cold weather functionality. Personal appearance still matters, though modified for the reality that Germanic winter has strong opinions about Roman vanity. The tent that provided protection through another night of potential death from exposure must be systematically disassembled and packed for transport, despite the fact that every component has been affected by overnight freezing. Leather becomes stiff, rope contracts, metal fittings require careful handling to prevent skin contact that could result in instant frostbite. It's like packing equipment that has been temporarily transformed into a different substance through temperature manipulation. As morning preparations conclude and the sentry prepares for another day of movement through hostile territory, you realise that Roman survival in Germanic winter depends not on dramatic heroics or individual toughness, but on systematic attention to hundreds of small details that collectively mean the difference between functional soldiers and frozen corpses littering Germanic forests for barbarian amusement. The cooking fire represents the difference between Roman soldiers and Roman casualties, which explains why building and maintaining fires in Germanic winter receives the same systematic attention that Romans apply to siege engineering and road construction. Your century's cook, a veteran named Gaius, whose weathered face suggests he's survived more campaigns than he cares to remember, treats meal preparation like a military operation with tactical objectives, logistical requirements, and specific protocols designed to keep 20,000 legionnaires functional in weather that considers cooking fires a personal challenge. Building a fire in Germanic winter requires more than just arranging wood and applying flame. The ground itself opposes Roman fire-building efforts through systematic application of frozen soil, accumulated snow, and wind patterns that seem designed by Germanic druids, specifically to frustrate Roman attempts at creating warmth. But Romans approach fire construction with the same engineering methodology that built aqueducts across mountain ranges and roads through impossible terrain. Your fire pit gets excavated down to unfrozen soil, then lined with stones that have been heated in yesterday's coals to provide thermal mass that helps sustain combustion, even when conditions become challenging. The pit design includes wind barriers constructed from available materials, ventilation channels that provide adequate airflow without creating drafts that could extinguish flames, and a cooking surface positioned at optimal height for efficient heat transfer to food preparation vessels. Listen to the morning sounds of Roman field cooking operations, the systematic chopping of wood into pieces sized for efficient combustion, the scrape of metal on flint as multiple fires are started simultaneously throughout the camp, the sizzle of water meeting hot metal as cooking begins, the ongoing negotiation between soldiers and fires that seem determined to provide smoke instead of heat. Someone nearby is having a philosophical discussion with wet kindling about its failure to cooperate with Roman fire-starting techniques. The fuel for Germanic winter cooking comes from forests that provide excellent raw materials, assuming you can convince the trees to cooperate with Roman logistical requirements. Pine burns hot but fast, requiring constant attention to maintain adequate heat for cooking. Oak provides sustained heat but takes longer to ignite in cold conditions. Birch bark serves as excellent kindling that burns even when wet, making it more valuable than gold for soldiers whose survival depends on reliable fire-starting capability. Roman field rations transform into something approaching actual food through cooking techniques refined over generations of campaign experience in hostile climates. Hardtack, that dense bread product with the texture and nutritional appeal of edible stone, becomes palatable when soaked in hot broth until it softens into something that won't break teeth or require industrial-strength jaw muscles to consume. It's not exactly fine dining, but it provides carbohydrates needed for maintaining body heat. The morning porridge represents Roman engineering applied to nutrition science, combining grain supplies with whatever protein sources are available to create meals that deliver the calories needed for Germanic winter survival. Salted pork gets diced and mixed into the grain base to provide fat and protein. Dried vegetables add vitamins that prevent the diseases that kill armies more effectively than enemy action. Salt enhances flavour and helps maintain the fluid balance that cold weather constantly threatens. Gaius demonstrates cooking techniques that maximise nutritional value while minimising fuel consumption. Crucial considerations when every piece of firewood represents energy expenditure in hostile territory, where foraging requires armed escorts and engineering efforts. Efficient heat transfer through proper pot positioning, systematic stirring to prevent burning that wastes food, and timing that ensures maximum nutrition extraction from limited ingredients. It's culinary science, practiced by people whose lives depend on getting it right. But Roman field cooking also adapts to local resources with the flexibility that characterises Roman expansion across diverse environments. Germanic forests provide nuts, roots, and edible plants that supplement standard rations with additional nutrition and variety. Wild garlic prevents scurvy while adding flavour. Pine needle tea provides vitamins while offering a change from standard beverages. Romans adapt their cuisine to local conditions with the same systematic efficiency they apply to everything else. The preparation of hot beverages becomes essential for maintaining morale and core body temperature throughout Germanic winter days. Heated wine mixed with water creates a warming drink that provides calories while helping maintain circulation. Herbal teas made from local plants offer variety while delivering vitamins and minerals. Even hot water flavoured with whatever spices are available becomes precious when consumed in temperatures that make every warm liquid feel like luxury accommodations. Roman cooking equipment designed for campaign use proves its value under Germanic winter conditions through functionality that prioritises durability and efficiency over aesthetic appeal. Bronze pots conduct heat effectively while resisting damage from rapid temperature changes. Iron implements maintain their edge despite cold weather stress. Ceramic vessels provide even heating while remaining portable enough for military transport. Every piece of cooking gear represents Roman metallurgy and craftsmanship adapted for harsh field conditions. The social aspect of meal preparation maintains unit cohesion, despite conditions that encourage individual survival thinking over collective cooperation. Soldiers share fuel, trade ingredients, contribute labour to collective cooking efforts that feed entire centuries. The fire becomes a gathering place where Romans can feel human instead of just functional, where conversation and shared experience creates psychological warmth that supplements physical heat. Food preservation in Germanic winter involves techniques that balance nutrition retention without the practical reality that standard preservation methods require modification for extreme cold conditions. Salted meat must be protected from freezing solids while maintaining preservation effectiveness. Grain supplies need protection from moisture that could cause spoilage. Wine requires storage methods that prevent freezing while maintaining palatability. Roman logistics adapt to Germanic conditions through systematic trial and error. As breakfast preparation concludes and soldiers prepare for another day of movement through hostile territory, the morning meal provides both physical sustenance and psychological reassurance that Roman civilization can maintain its standards even in environments where nature actively opposes Roman presence. Food becomes more than nutrition. It becomes proof that organization and systematic methodology can triumph over conditions designed to defeat civilized people. The challenge of maintaining adequate hydration in Germanic winter involves more complex considerations than simply drinking when thirsty, because thirst mechanisms don't function properly in extreme cold. Water sources have strong opinions about remaining liquid, and the human body's fluid requirements change dramatically when every breath expels precious moisture into air, so dry it seems to actively steal water from your lungs. Roman military medicine understands these physiological realities through hard experience gained in campaigns across climates that test human adaptability. Your primary water supply, carried in leather bottles positioned inside your cloak where body heat theoretically keeps contents liquid, begins each day as an optimistic experiment in temperature management that frequently ends with you carrying water-shaped ice instead of actual drinking water. The leather containers, designed for Mediterranean conditions where freezing rarely poses logistical challenges, require constant attention to prevent their contents from expanding into solid form that could burst the containers and leave you without hydration capability. Marcus demonstrates veteran hydration techniques that preserve both water supplies and core body temperature through systematic management of fluid intake timing and temperature. Drinking ice-cold water rapidly can lower your internal temperature dangerously, but drinking warm water requires fuel to heat it and time that military operations don't always permit. The solution involves sipping room temperature water frequently, rather than consuming large quantities of liquid that require significant energy to warm to body temperature. The Roman wine ration, originally intended for morale and calories rather than hydration purposes, becomes essential survival equipment in Germanic winter because alcohol has a lower freezing point than water, meaning wine mixed with water solutions remain liquid at temperatures that turn pure water into decorative ice sculptures. It's not exactly a medical prescription, but when your choice is between diluted wine and no liquid at all, Roman soldiers developed flexible attitudes about beverage preferences. Listen to the sounds of Roman hydration management in winter conditions, the systematic tapping of water containers to check for ice formation, the careful pouring of liquids to assess consistency and temperature, the ongoing discussions about optimal water to wine ratios for preventing freezing while maintaining functionality, the creative solutions soldiers develop when standard hydration methods fail to account for Germanic weather conditions. Germanic winter affects human hydration requirements in ways that Mediterranean military medicine never anticipated. Cold air contains less moisture than warm air, meaning every breath exports water from your body into an environment that never returns that moisture to your system. Physical activity in cold conditions increases water loss through respiration even when you don't feel thirsty. The combination can create dehydration that develops gradually and isn't recognized until it begins affecting performance. Roman medical understanding adapts to Germanic conditions through systematic observation of soldier health and performance under winter stress. Dehydration symptoms in cold weather differ from heat-related fluid loss. Cognitive function deteriorates before physical symptoms become obvious. Unit effectiveness decreases when soldiers don't maintain adequate hydration levels. Prevention becomes more important than treatment when medical resources are limited and environmental conditions complicate recovery. The procurement of water in Germanic territory involves considerations that go beyond simply finding liquid sources, because Germanic streams and rivers freeze partially or completely during winter months, requiring Roman soldiers to locate running water that remains liquid, break through ice to access frozen sources, or melt snow and ice using precious fuel resources. Each option involves trade-offs between immediate hydration needs and longer-term survival requirements. Snow and ice provide abundant water sources if you understand the techniques for converting frozen water back to liquid form without compromising thermal regulation or wasting fuel supplies. Clean snow melts into potable water when heated properly, but the process requires significant energy expenditure. Eating snow directly lowers core body temperature dangerously. Ice provides more water per volume than snow, but requires more heat energy to melt effectively. Roman camp organization includes systematic water procurement and distribution systems that ensure adequate hydration for 20,000 soldiers, despite Germanic winter challenges to standard logistics. Designated water collection details locate and secure liquid sources. Heating stations convert frozen water sources into potable supplies. Distribution protocols ensure fair access to limited supplies, while maintaining military discipline and preventing conflicts over scarce resources. The psychological impact of hydration challenges affects morale in ways that require active management by centurions and medical personnel. Soldiers who can't access adequate water supplies become concerned about survival prospects. Dehydration affects decision-making and unit cohesion. Maintaining confidence requires demonstrating that Roman logistical systems can provide essential resources even under conditions that challenge traditional supply methods. Roman engineering applies systematic problem-solving methodology to Germanic hydration challenges through development of techniques and equipment modifications that improve water supply reliability. Insulation methods for water containers that extend the time liquid remains unfrozen. Heating techniques that efficiently convert ice to water without excessive fuel consumption. Storage systems that protect water supplies from contamination while preventing freezing. The veterans share practical wisdom about recognizing dehydration symptoms in cold weather conditions, because the standard indicators of fluid loss work differently when environmental factors mask normal physiological responses. Decreased urination frequency becomes harder to monitor when privacy for natural functions is limited. Thirst mechanisms become unreliable when cold weather affects normal sensation. Cognitive symptoms like confusion or irritability could indicate dehydration, hypothermia, or simple frustration with Germanic winter. As the daily water procurement and distribution routine concludes, Roman soldiers prepare for another day of movement through territory where liquid water is a precious resource that requires systematic management to maintain army effectiveness. Hydration becomes another engineering challenge that Romans solve through organisation, adaptation, and systematic attention to details that collectively ensure survival in conditions designed to defeat civilized armies. The afternoon sun, what little exists in Germanic winter's abbreviated daylight schedule, hangs low on the horizon like a pale disk that provides illumination without warmth when your centurion signals the halt that means tonight's camp construction begins. 20,000 Romans must transform empty Germanic countryside into a fully fortified military base before darkness falls, using tools designed for Mediterranean soil, on ground frozen harder than marble, and significantly less cooperative with Roman engineering ambitions. Your century receives its section assignment through the systematic organisation that makes Roman armies function like enormous construction crews with weapons. Each unit has specific responsibilities: ditch excavation, rampart construction, palisade installation, gate building, and internal camp organisation. The work begins immediately because Germanic winter provides perhaps 3 hours of usable daylight for construction projects that normally require 4 hours in reasonable climates with the soil that acknowledges Roman authority. The first challenge involves convincing frozen Germanic soil to accept Roman engineering modifications through application of tools, techniques, and systematic profanity that would make construction workers proud. Your entrenching shovel, that marvel of practical design that serves as digging implement, weapon, and general-purpose problem solver, meets Germanic frost with results that generate sparks, ringing impacts, and the kind of resistance that suggests the earth itself has joined the barbarian alliance. Marcus demonstrates veteran excavation techniques that work around Germanic winter's opposition to Roman construction projects. Small fires built directly on the ground surface to thaw the frost layer. Heated water poured onto frozen soil to soften earth enough for digging. The systematic application of picks and mattocks to break through ice formations that have turned topsoil into something resembling granite mixed with spite and Germanic stubbornness. Listen to the sounds of Romans building civilization in hostile territory. The ring of iron tools striking frozen earth, the systematic chopping of trees for palisade construction, the organised chaos of 20,000 soldiers coordinating construction activities despite weather, conditions that would shut down modern building projects. Someone nearby has discovered that his section contains a buried boulder, and is sharing opinions about geology that include creative suggestions about what rocks should do to themselves. The Roman defensive perimeter takes shape through systematic application of engineering principles that account for Germanic winter modifications to standard construction techniques. The ditch gets excavated to regulation depth despite soil conditions that resist digging, using techniques that balance thermal energy expenditure against defensive requirements. The rampart gets built from excavated earth mixed with stones and timber that provide structural integrity in freeze-thaw cycles. Palisade construction requires adapting Roman defensive architecture to work with Germanic timber resources and winter construction conditions. Pine trees provide excellent raw materials for defensive walls, but cold weather makes wood harder to work while making the work itself more physically demanding. Each palisade stake must be shaped, sharpened, and installed according to specifications that ensure effectiveness against barbarian assault, while accounting for ground conditions that challenge standard installation methods. The gates receive special attention because they represent potential weak points in Roman defensive systems, requiring construction techniques that maintain security while allowing necessary traffic flow for military operations. Gate posts must be anchored securely in frozen ground. Hinges must function despite temperature conditions that affect metal flexibility. Guard positions must provide protection for gate defenders while allowing effective observation of approaches. Roman camp internal organisation follows systematic layouts that maximise efficiency for military operations, while accommodating the reality that Germanic winter affects movement, communication, and general functionality in ways that require modifications to standard camp design. Streets get planned to account for snow accumulation and ice formation. Tent areas get positioned to provide wind protection while maintaining unit organisation. Central facilities get located for maximum accessibility despite weather conditions. The construction of cooking and heating facilities throughout the camp involves engineering solutions that balance Roman military requirements with Germanic winter necessities. Fire pits must be designed to function effectively despite wind and precipitation, while providing adequate heat for food preparation and soldier warmth. Fuel storage requires protection from weather while remaining accessible for continuous use throughout cold nights that demand constant heat production. Roman military engineering adapts to Germanic conditions through systematic problem-solving that incorporates lessons learned from previous winter campaigns. Tool modifications that improve effectiveness on frozen ground. Construction. Techniques that account for shortened daylight hours. Material usage that maximizes defensive capability while minimizing resource consumption in an environment where every piece of timber represents energy expenditure in hostile territory. The coordination required for camp construction involves communication and timing systems that function despite environmental conditions that interfere with normal Roman military procedures. Hand signals work poorly in blowing snow. Vocal commands get distorted by wind. Visual coordination becomes challenging when visibility decreases due to weather conditions. Roman organisation adapts through redundant communication methods and systematic attention to maintaining unit coordination. Roman construction standards maintain their specifications despite Germanic winter challenges, because defensive effectiveness depends on proper execution of engineering principles that protect Roman lives against barbarian assault. Compromising defensive architecture to accommodate weather conditions creates vulnerabilities that enemy forces can exploit. Roman survival depends on building fortifications that meet military requirements regardless of environmental obstacles. As daylight fades and construction activities conclude, the completed camp demonstrates Roman engineering capability adapted to Germanic winter conditions through systematic application of modified techniques that maintain defensive effectiveness while accounting for environmental challenges. Tonight, 20,000 Romans will sleep behind fortifications built from frozen ground through determination, organisation, and the systematic refusal to accept that weather conditions excuse inferior defensive preparations. The supply train that keeps 20,000 Romans alive in Germanic winter represents logistical achievement that borders on magic, assuming magic involved systematic planning, redundant systems, and the kind of organisational thinking that treats impossible conditions as engineering problems requiring Roman solutions. Your evening meal exists because someone calculated food requirements 6 months ago, planned transportation routes through territory that Romans hadn't conquered yet, and organised delivery systems that function despite weather designed to defeat civilised logistics. Roman supply wagons arrive in camp with the punctuality that characterises imperial administration at its finest, despite having travelled through Germanic territory where roads exist more as theoretical concepts than actual infrastructure, where weather conditions challenge the basic assumptions of wheeled transportation, and where barbarian tribes consider Roman supply lines attractive targets for military disruption and general entertainment value. The systematic unloading and distribution of supplies reveals the complexity of maintaining army effectiveness in conditions that require constant adaptation of standard logistical procedures. Food supplies must be supplies, protected from freezing while remaining accessible for preparation. Equipment requires storage methods that prevent weather damage while maintaining availability for immediate use. Medical supplies need temperature-controlled storages despite the lack of temperature control beyond fires and systematic attention to insulation. Listen to the sounds of Roman warrior, Roman logistics in action. The creak and rumble of supply wagons negotiating frozen ruts in Germanic paths that barely qualify as roads. The systematic counting and checking of supplies as they get distributed to individual units. The ongoing coordination between supply officers and sentry commanders who must balance current consumption against future needs in territory where resupply becomes increasingly difficult as weather worsens. Your personal equipment receives systematic maintenance using supplies that travelled hundreds of miles through hostile territory to reach Germanic winter camps, where proper gear maintenance means the difference between effective soldiers and frozen corpses that provide barbarian entertainment. Weapon oil formulated specifically for Germanic conditions, leather treatments that maintain flexibility despite temperature variations, textile repairs using materials that function in extreme cold while providing adequate protection. Roman medical supplies adapt to Germanic winter conditions through systematic stockpiling of materials needed for cold weather injuries and illnesses that Mediterranean campaigns rarely encountered, treatments for frostbite that can restore circulation to affected extremities, medications for respiratory ailments caused by breathing cold air for extended periods, surgical supplies for treating injuries complicated by environmental factors that affect healing and recovery processes. The fuel supply system that keeps Romans alive through Germanic winter nights involves logistical planning that accounts for consumption rates that vary with weather conditions, availability of local resources that can supplement transported materials, and transportation methods that deliver combustible materials, despite conditions that make normal supply operations challenging. Charcoal travels better than firewood but provides different heating characteristics. Oil burns efficiently but requires careful storage to prevent freezing. Roman food distribution systems maintain nutritional standards despite supply chain challenges that would defeat less organized civilizations. Grain supplies require protection from moisture and rodents while remaining accessible for daily consumption. Preserved meats must be stored at temperatures that maintain preservation without freezing solid. Wine and oil need storage methods that prevent spoilage while maintaining palatability and functionality for military requirements. The systematic replacement of equipment worn out by Germanic winter conditions involves logistics that anticipate failure rates for gear subjected to environmental stress beyond normal design parameters. Boots require replacement at rates that reflect harsh terrain and temperature conditions. Cloaks wear out faster when subjected to constant use in abrasive weather. Weapons need more frequent maintenance and occasional replacement when extreme conditions cause failures that milder climates don't produce. Roman engineering supplies enable camp construction and maintenance projects that transform empty Germanic countryside into functional military bases despite environmental obstacles that challenge standard construction methods. Tools designed for specific soil conditions, hardware that functions despite temperature variations, construction materials that maintain structural integrity through freeze-thaw cycles that destroy inferior building methods. The communication systems that coordinate Roman logistics across vast distances adapt to Germanic winter conditions through redundant message delivery methods that account for weather disruption of normal dispatch system. Multiple messengers carry identical information along different routes. Signal systems use methods that penetrate weather conditions that interfere with visual communication. Supply requests get submitted early to account for delivery delays caused by environmental factors. Roman financial systems maintain accurate accounting for supply consumption and replacement requirements despite conditions that challenge normal record-keeping procedures. Inventory tracking continues despite weather that affects normal documentation methods. Cost accounting for supply operations includes factors that Germanic winter adds to standard logistical expenses. Budget planning accounts for increased consumption rates that cold weather imposes on army supply requirements. The psychological impact of reliable supply operations maintains morale through demonstration that Roman organizational systems can provide necessary resources even under conditions that challenge traditional logistics capabilities. Soldiers who receive regular food, equipment, maintenance supplies, and medical materials maintain confidence in Roman military effectiveness. Reliable logistics prove that civilization can function even in territories where nature opposes civilized presence. Roman adaptation to Germanic supply challenges involves systematic modification of procedures developed for Mediterranean operations, incorporating lessons learned through experience with winter campaigns that tested logistical systems under conditions that classical military theory never contemplated. Flexibility within systematic organization, adaptation that maintains Roman standards while acknowledging environmental realities, innovation that solves problems while preserving institutional effectiveness. As evening supply distribution concludes and soldiers prepare equipment for another day of winter operations, Roman logistics demonstrate the organizational capability that enables imperial expansion into territories where environmental conditions actively oppose civilized presence. Supply systems become more than simple resource delivery. They become proof that Roman systematic thinking can triumph over obstacles that would defeat less organized civilizations through superior planning, execution, and systematic attention to details that collectively enable survival where survival seems impossible. The medical tent represents Roman civilization's systematic approach to keeping human bodies functional under conditions that nature designed to shut down biological processes gradually but persistently, where every breath exposes internal systems to temperatures that challenge basic physiological assumptions about human survival, and where the distinction between healthy soldiers and casualties becomes a daily negotiation between Roman medical knowledge and Germanic winter's determination to prove civilized medicine inadequate for barbarian conditions. Roman military medicine adapts to Germanic winter through systematic observation of cold-related injuries and illnesses that Mediterranean medical training never anticipate. Frostbite presents symptoms and requires treatments that differ significantly from heat-related injuries. Hypothermia develops through stages that require recognition and intervention techniques specific to temperature-related physiological failures. Respiratory ailments caused by breathing frozen air create medical challenges that warm weather medicine doesn't address. Your century's medicus, a practical man named Quintus, whose medical training combines traditional Roman knowledge with experience gained through winter campaigns that tested theoretical medical knowledge against harsh environmental realities, demonstrates cold weather medical techniques with the systematic attention that characterizes Roman approaches to problem solving in hostile conditions. His methods balance medical theory with practical constraints imposed by field conditions and limited resources. Listen to the sounds of Roman military medicine in Germanic winter. The systematic preparation of treatments using materials that must be kept warm to remain effective. The controlled discussion of symptoms and treatments between medics who are learning cold weather medicine through practical application. The careful examination of patients whose conditions require assessment techniques modified for environmental factors that complicate normal diagnostic procedures. Frostbite treatment involves systematic warming procedures that restore circulation without causing additional tissue damage through rapid temperature changes that could worsen injury. Gradual rewarming using controlled heat sources. Gentle manipulation to restore circulation without damaging tissue affected by freezing. Medications that improve blood flow while managing pain that accompanies the return of sensation to affected areas. Follow-up care that prevents secondary infections in damaged tissue. Roman medical supplies adapted for Germanic conditions include medications and treatments that address cold weather medical challenges through systematic stockpiling of materials that function effectively despite temperature conditions that affect normal pharmaceutical preparations. Pain medications that remain effective in cold conditions, antiseptics that don't freeze solid, bandaging materials that maintain flexibility and adhesion despite temperature variations and moisture conditions. Hypothermia recognition and treatment require medical knowledge that goes beyond normal Roman military medicine to address physiological conditions that develop when core body temperature drops below levels that support normal biological functions. Early symptoms that indicate developing problems before they become life-threatening. Systematic warming procedures that restore normal body temperature without causing additional medical complications. Prevention techniques that reduce the likelihood of temperature-related injuries. Roman medical understanding of cold weather respiratory ailments develops through systematic observation of breathing problems that affect soldiers exposed to frozen air for extended periods. Bronchial irritation caused by breathing air that contains insufficient moisture. Lung infections that develop when immune systems are compromised by constant exposure to environmental stress. Treatment methods that address respiratory problems while maintaining soldier effectiveness for continued military operations. The psychological aspects of Germanic winter create medical challenges that require systematic attention to mental health factors that affect unit effectiveness and individual soldier survival. Depression caused by shortened daylight hours and constant discomfort. Anxiety related to survival concerns in hostile environmental conditions. Behavioral changes that indicate developing psychological problems before they compromise military effectiveness or individual safety. Roman medical logistics ensure adequate supplies of medications and treatment materials, despite supply chain challenges that complicate normal medical resource management. Cold weather storage requirements for medical supplies that must maintain effectiveness despite temperature variations. Transportation methods for fragile medical materials that could be damaged by environmental conditions. Inventory management that accounts for increased consumption rates when environmental conditions increase injury and illness frequency. Field surgery in Germanic winter conditions requires modifications to standard Roman medical procedures that account for environmental factors that complicate normal surgical interventions, operating procedures that maintain patient body temperature during surgical exposure, wound treatment techniques that function effectively despite cold conditions that affect healing processes, post-surgical care adapted for environmental conditions that challenge normal recovery expectations. Roman medical training adapts to incorporate Germanic winter medical knowledge through systematic documentation of cold weather medical experiences that expand traditional Roman medical understanding. Case studies of cold-related injuries and their treatments. Systematic recording of the environmental factors that affect medical outcomes. Training procedures that prepare military medics for medical challenges that warm weather campaigns never presented. The integration of Germanic folk medicine with Roman medical knowledge occurs through systematic evaluation of local treatment methods that prove effective for conditions that Roman medicine encounters for the first time in Germanic territory. Herbal remedies that address cold weather ailments. Local treatment techniques that complement Roman medical procedures. Cultural medical practices that provide insights into surviving Germanic environmental conditions. Roman medical ethics maintain standards of patient care despite environmental conditions that challenge normal medical practice through systematic commitment to preserving human life and maintaining unit effectiveness even under conditions that test the limits of medical capability, equal treatment for all soldiers regardless of rank or social status, systematic attention to preventive medicine that reduces injury and illness rates, professional medical standards that maintain effectiveness despite challenging working conditions. As evening medical rounds conclude and the medical personnel prepare for another night of monitoring soldier health under conditions that test the limits of Roman medical knowledge, military medicine demonstrates systematic adaptation to environmental challenges through professional commitment to maintaining army effectiveness despite conditions designed to defeat civilized medical practice, through systematic application of knowledge, experience, and organized attention to human welfare in hostile environments. The mental challenge of surviving Germanic winter involves more than simply enduring physical discomfort, because psychological resilience requires active maintenance when every environmental factor seems designed to break down human will to continue, where shortened daylight hours disrupt internal biological rhythms that regulate mood and energy levels, and where the constant stress of potential death from exposure creates background anxiety that wears away at mental stability like water-eroding stone over centuries of patient persistence. Your thoughts, when you can focus them clearly through the mental fog that constant cold creates in cognitive processes, increasingly revolve around warmth, comfort, and the Mediterranean world that seems impossibly distant from Germanic forests where winter rules with absolute authority over human ambition. These aren't homesick fantasies but survival mechanisms that maintain psychological connection to a world beyond current suffering, reminders that this harsh reality is temporary despite feeling permanent when you're living through it. Marcus shares veteran wisdom about winter psychology that emphasizes acceptance of discomfort rather than fighting against conditions you cannot change, because resistance to unchangeable reality wastes mental energy that should be conserved for dealing with challenges that can be overcome through Roman determination and systematic problem solving. The key involves distinguishing between problems you can solve and conditions you must simply endure with dignity and purpose. Listen to the sounds that affect psychological state in Germanic winter camps. The constant wind that penetrates every shelter and reminds you that nature remains hostile to Roman presence. The crackle of fires that provide both physical warmth and psychological comfort. The quiet conversations between soldiers who are processing their own mental responses to conditions that test human resilience. the distant calls of Germanic wildlife that remind everyone how far they are from civilized territory. The psychological impact of shortened daylight hours creates depression-like symptoms that affect unit morale and individual effectiveness in ways that Roman military medicine is only beginning to understand through systematic observation of soldier behavior during extended winter campaigns. Energy levels decrease when sunlight exposure drops below normal ranges. Sleep patterns become disrupted when natural light cycles don't provide adequate environmental cues for biological rhythm regulation. Mood stability requires active management when environmental factors interfere with normal psychological functioning. Roman military culture adapts to address psychological challenges through systematic maintenance of routines, social connections, and purposeful activity that provide mental anchors during periods when environmental conditions challenge psychological stability. Regular duties that maintain sense of purpose and identity. Social interaction that prevents isolation and provides mutual support. Physical activity that maintains both bodily function and mental health through chemical processes that exercise stimulates in human brain chemistry. The veterans demonstrate techniques for managing psychological stress that develops when survival becomes a daily concern requiring constant attention and energy expenditure. Meditation methods adapted for military conditions that provide mental rest despite physical discomfort. Visualization techniques that maintain connection to positive memories and future goals. Breathing exercises that promote relaxation while maintaining alertness required for military duties and personal safety. Germanic winter creates unique psychological challenges that Mediterranean peoples rarely encounter through exposure to environmental conditions that test human adaptability beyond normal ranges seasonal effective. Disorder, though not yet named or understood by Roman medicine, affects soldiers whose biological systems are adapted to consistent sunlight and moderate temperatures. Cabin fever develops when soldiers are confined to small spaces for extended periods. Social tensions increase when privacy becomes impossible, and personal space gets reduced to areas barely large enough for sleeping. Roman approaches to maintaining mental health during winter campaigns involve systematic attention to factors that support psychological resilience despite environmental stress that challenges normal coping mechanisms. Adequate nutrition that supports brain chemistry required for stable mood regulation. Sufficient rest despite sleeping conditions that are far from ideal. Social support systems that provide emotional resources for dealing with stress, fear, and discomfort that constant survival challenges create. The psychological preparation for potential combat in Germanic winter conditions requires mental conditioning that goes beyond normal military training to address the reality that winter warfare presents unique challenges to maintaining combat effectiveness when environmental factors interfere with normal cognitive and physical functions. Confidence building that acknowledges environmental disadvantages while emphasizing Roman advantages in organization, equipment, and training. Stress inoculation that prepares soldiers for combat under conditions that amplify normal battle stress through environmental factors. Roman military leadership recognizes the importance of psychological factors in maintaining unit effectiveness through systematic attention to morale, motivation, and mental health issues that affect army capability more than individual comfort. Centurions receive informal training in recognizing psychological problems before they compromise unit effectiveness. Officers learn to balance empathy with discipline in ways that support soldier psychological needs while maintaining military standards necessary for survival and mission accomplishment. These social dynamics of winter survival create both psychological benefits and challenges, as soldiers develop deeper bonds through shared hardship while also experiencing increased interpersonal tension when privacy disappears and personal space becomes a luxury that Germanic winter doesn't provide. Trust develops between soldiers who depend on each other for survival. Friendships deepen when shared experience creates mutual understanding and support. But conflicts also intensify when stress levels remain constantly elevated and normal social buffers become unavailable. Roman religious practices adapt to provide psychological support during Germanic winter campaigns through systematic modification of traditional ceremonies and observances that address spiritual needs while accommodating environmental limitations on normal religious activities. Prayers that acknowledge current hardship while maintaining faith in Roman destiny and divine protection. Religious observances that maintain cultural identity and spiritual connection despite physical separation from Roman temples and traditional religious infrastructure. The psychological impact of constant vigilance required for survival in hostile territory creates mental fatigue that affects decision-making capability and overall effectiveness in ways that require systematic management to prevent psychological breakdown that could compromise individual survival and unit effectiveness. Techniques for maintaining alertness without becoming mentally exhausted. Methods for processing stress and anxiety in healthy ways that don't interfere with military duties. Strategies for maintaining hope and motivation when conditions seem designed to break down human will to continue. As psychological challenges of Germanic winter continue testing Roman mental resilience, soldiers discover internal resources and coping mechanisms that demonstrate human adaptability when systematic support combines with individual determination to maintain psychological stability despite environmental conditions designed to break down civilized mental health through persistent application of discomfort, danger, and distance from normal psychological anchors that support human mental well-being. The bonds formed between soldiers during Germanic winter campaigns transcend normal military relationships because the shared survival under the conditions that constantly threaten death creates trust and interdependence that peacetime service rarely generates, where your tent mate's willingness to share body heat could mean the difference between waking up alive or becoming a frozen corpse that provides educational opportunities for Germanic warriors about Roman military preparedness under adverse conditions. Your relationship with Marcus evolves beyond simple military cooperation into something approaching family connection, because when another human being consistently chooses to help you maintain core body temperature despite his own discomfort, when he shares precious resources like dry socks and emergency food supplies, when he wakes you during the night to check for hypothermia symptoms, that person becomes more than a fellow soldier. He becomes someone whose survival matters as much as your own. The 8-man contubernium that shares tent space with cooking duties and survival responsibilities becomes a micro-civilization that functions through systematic cooperation and mutual support that makes individual survival possible under conditions where isolation equals death. Each member contributes specialized skills. Marcus knows fire-starting techniques, Gaius understands food preservation, Lucius provides medical knowledge, and you're learning to recognize weather patterns that predict dangerous conditions before they become life-threatening. Listen to the sounds of Roman brotherhood developing under Germanic winter stress, the quiets, conversations between soldiers who are sharing personal information they would never reveal under normal circumstances, the systematic coordination of survival tasks between tent mates who understand their mutual dependence, the gentle humour that helps process fear and discomfort without acknowledging those emotions directly, the occasional silence that indicates trust deep enough that words become unnecessary. The systematic sharing of resources within your tent group creates economic relationships that operate according to principles that would make Roman merchants proud, except currency consists of body heat, dry clothing, emergency food supplies, and survival knowledge rather than coins and commercial goods. Everyone contributes according to ability and receives according to need, because hoarding resources when tent mates are suffering threatens everyone's survival through breakdown of cooperative relationships that maintain group effectiveness. Roman military culture encourages brotherhood development through systematic recognition that unit cohesion improves combat effectiveness and survival rates under conditions that test individual resilience beyond normal limits. Shared duties that require cooperation and coordination. Common meals that create social bonding through food, preparation and consumption rituals. Mutual dependence that makes individual success inseparable from group welfare and collective survival. The veterans share stories about previous campaigns that demonstrate how winter survival bonds create lifetime relationships between soldiers who experienced extreme hardship together and learn to trust each other completely under conditions where trust errors can be fatal. Friendships that last decades after military service ends, mutual support networks that provide assistance during civilian life challenges, loyalty that transcends normal social boundaries and creates extended family relationships based on shared survival experience. Germanic winter eliminates privacy completely, which creates both intimacy and tension as soldiers learn about each other's personal habits, fears, weaknesses, and strengths through constant proximity that reveals character traits that normal military service keeps hidden. You discover that Marcus talks in his sleep about a daughter he left in Gaul. Gaius quietly prays to gods that Roman religion doesn't officially recognize. Lucius has nightmares about previous battles that wake him whimpering like a frightened child. The psychological support that brotherhood provides becomes essential for maintaining mental health when environmental conditions create stress levels that challenge individual psychological resilience. emotional support during moments when survival seems impossible, practical assistance when individual capabilities become compromised by cold, exhaustion, or discouragement, moral support that maintains hope and determination when conditions seem designed to break down human will to continue fighting against overwhelming environmental odds. Roman military discipline adapts to accommodate brotherhood relationships while maintaining command authority and unit effectiveness necessary for survival and mission accomplishment. Centurions recognize that informal support networks improve official military performance when they operate within proper boundaries. Officers learn to work with social bonds rather than against them when those bonds improve unit cohesion and individual soldier effectiveness under challenging conditions. The development of a mutual survival skills creates educational relationships where each soldier teaches specialized knowledge while learning techniques that improve individual and group survival capability. Fire starting methods that work in wet conditions, food preparation techniques that maximize nutrition from limited supplies, equipment maintenance procedures that extend gear life under harsh conditions, medical knowledge that enables treatment of cold weather injuries and illnesses. Brotherhood relationships also create moral obligations that extend beyond official military duty to include personal commitments between individuals who have learned to depend on each other for survival, promises to check on families if someone doesn't survive the campaign, agreements to share resources equally regardless of individual contribution levels, commitments to maintain friendships after military service ends and normal social distance could resume without affecting survival. The emotional processing of fear, homesickness, and survival anxiety becomes possible through brotherhood relationships that provide safe spaces for acknowledging feelings that military culture normally discourages soldiers from expressing directly. Conversations that allow discussion of fear without compromising military bearing. Support for homesickness that doesn't undermine unit morale. Acknowledgement of survival concerns that helps process anxiety without creating panic or despair that could affect group effectiveness. Roman concepts of honour and duty expand to include obligations between tentmates that operate alongside official military responsibilities, creating dual loyalty systems that generally reinforce each other, but occasionally create conflicts between personal relationships and military orders that require resolution through systematic balancing of competing obligations. Duty to Rome and duty to tentmates, loyalty to commanders and loyalty to brothers, individual survival and group welfare. The legacy of winter campaign brotherhood extends beyond immediate survival to create veteran networks that provide mutual support during post-military life transitions and civilian career development. Business partnerships between former tentmates who learn to trust each other completely. Marriage connections between families of soldiers who serve together. Political alliances between veterans who share common. Experiences and mutual loyalty that transcends normal social boundaries and creates lasting influence networks. As Germanic winter continues testing Roman resilience, brotherhood relationships deepen through daily proof that systematic cooperation and mutual support can triumph over conditions designed to defeat individual survival through collective effort that transforms isolated soldiers into extended families whose bonds last beyond military service and demonstrate human capacity for creating civilization, even under conditions that seem designed to destroy all traces of human cooperation and mutual care. Your understanding of Germanic territory transforms from abstract geographical concepts into personal survival knowledge gained through systematic attention to environmental details that could mean the difference between finding shelter and freezing to death in forests that all look identical to Mediterranean eyes, but contain subtle variations that Germanic natives read like Romans read written scrolls, where every tree species, terrain feature, and weather sign provides information about survival resources, potential dangers, and navigation possibilities. The mental mapping process begins with systematic observation of landmarks that remain visible and recognizable despite weather conditions that change the landscape appearance dramatically when snow covers familiar features and ice transforms streams into different-looking terrain obstacles. That distinctive rock formation becomes a navigation reference point. The grove of particularly tall pines serves as a landmark for locating the hidden stream that provides unfrozen water. The hill with the unusual slope indicates direction toward territories that Roman scouts have mapped and declared relatively safe for small unit movement. Marcus teaches you veteran techniques for reading Germanic landscape that go beyond simple navigation to include survival resource identification, threat assessment, and weather prediction based on environmental cues that Mediterranean training never covered, because Roman military education assumes soldiers will fight in civilized territory where roads exist and supply lines function predictably, rather than in wilderness areas where survival depends on local resource exploitation and environmental knowledge. Listen to the sounds that provide navigation and survival information in Germanic winter. The different tones that wind makes when passing through various types of forest terrain, indicating both direction and potential shelter locations. The subtle differences in stream sounds that reveal water depth, flow rate, and likelihood of ice formation. The bird calls that indicate time of day, weather changes, and presence of other humans in areas where Germanic warriors might be moving through familiar territory. The systematic study of Germanic weather patterns becomes essential survival knowledge because understanding how local climate systems develop enables prediction of dangerous conditions before they become life-threatening, while recognizing favorable weather windows allows efficient movement and resource gathering during periods when environmental conditions support Roman military operations rather than actively opposing them. Cloud formations that predict blizzards, wind patterns that indicate temperature changes, snow characteristics that reveal underlying terrain and travel conditions. Roman military intelligence adapts to include systematic collection and analysis of environmental information that supports survival and tactical operations in territory where geographical knowledge provides strategic advantages over enemies who use local environmental factors as weapons against Roman military superiority. Mapping of water sources that remain unfrozen during winter months. Identification of shelter locations that provide protection from severe weather. Documentation of fuel resources that support heating and cooking requirements for military units operating without normal supply support. The psychological impact of developing environmental competence provides confidence and sense of control that improves morale and effectiveness when soldiers understand their surroundings well enough to make informed decisions about survival and tactical considerations, rather than simply reacting to environmental challenges without understanding or preparation. Knowledge reduces fear and anxiety while improving actual survival capability through better decision-making based on accurate environmental assessment rather than uninformed guesswork. Germanic territory teaches lessons about seasonal resource availability that Romans must learn quickly to supplement standard military supplies with local resources that improve nutrition, provide medical materials, and offer equipment repair supplies that extend the life and effectiveness of manufactured goods brought from Roman territory. Edible plants that provide vitamins preventing scurvy and other deficiency diseases, medicinal herbs that treat cold weather ailments, raw materials that enable equipment maintenance and modification for local conditions. The development of primitive survival skills that Roman civilization normally makes unnecessary becomes essential knowledge when environmental conditions challenge the effectiveness of manufactured equipment and systematic supply systems, requiring soldiers to supplement technological solutions with basic techniques for creating fire, finding food, constructing shelter, and maintaining health. Using materials and methods that human beings developed before civilization provided systematic alternatives to environmental adaptation. Roman engineering principles apply to wilderness survival through systematic problem solving that treats environmental challenges as engineering problems requiring analysis, planning, and systematic implementation of solutions using available resources and techniques adapted for specific conditions. Shelter construction using local materials and Roman architectural knowledge, tool creation using Roman metallurgy principles and Germanic raw materials, infrastructure development that improves living conditions through systematic application of Roman construction techniques adapted for local resources and environmental constraints. The navigation techniques necessary for survival in Germanic territory without Roman roads or systematic infrastructure combine traditional Roman military orientation methods with new skills for reading natural landmarks and environmental cues that provide direction and location information when manufactured navigation aids become ineffective due to weather conditions or equipment failure. Star navigation when visibility permits. Terrain reading for direction finding. Natural compass. Techniques using environmental indicators. Germanic winter creates opportunities for learning indigenous survival techniques through systematic observation of local human and animal adaptations to environmental conditions that Roman technology doesn't adequately address, providing supplementary knowledge that improves survival capability when combined with Roman organizational and technological advantages. animal behavior that indicates weather changes and resource locations, indigenous construction techniques that provide effective shelter using local materials, traditional food preservation and preparation methods adapted to local climate conditions. The systematic documentation of survival knowledge gained through Germanic winter experience creates informal manuals that improve Roman military capability for future winter campaigns, while providing educational resources that help soldiers adapt more quickly to environmental challenges that Roman training doesn't adequately address. Personal notes about effective techniques and failed approaches, shared knowledge that improves unit survival capability, institutional learning that enhances Roman military effectiveness through systematic incorporation of environmental adaptation knowledge. Roman adaptability demonstrates imperial strength through systematic incorporation of local knowledge and environmental adaptation without abandoning Roman identity, organization, or technological advantages, proving that civilization can learn from barbarian territory while maintaining civilizational superiority through superior organization and systematic application of improved knowledge to military and survival challenges that test human resilience and institutional effectiveness under conditions that challenge basic assumptions about human capability and civilizational advantage. The moment you realize that not everyone will survive. Germanic winter comes during the third week of continuous sub-freezing temperatures, when Servius from the Second Contubernium stops responding to commands with his usual efficiency and begins staring into fires with the blank expression of someone whose mind has started negotiating separate peace treaties with reality, where his body continues performing basic military functions while his psychological core retreats into internal spaces that provide refuge from environmental pressures that exceed human tolerance limits. Roman military discipline maintains functional effectiveness even when individual soldiers begin showing signs of psychological breakdown, because institutional systems account for human limitations while providing support structures that prevent individual failure from compromising unit effectiveness. But Germanic winter tests these systems with relentless pressure that wears down psychological resilience faster than Roman medical knowledge can repair or replace damaged mental capacity through available treatment methods. The systematic signs of breakdown become recognizable through veteran observation and systematic attention to behavioral changes that indicate developing psychological problems before they compromise military effectiveness or individual survival capability. Servius stops maintaining his equipment with regulation attention to detail. His responses to questions become slower and require repetition. His eating habits change as appetite decreases and interest in food preparation disappears. Most concerning, his survival instincts diminish as basic self-preservation behaviors become mechanical rather than conscious decisions. Listen to the sounds of a Roman unit coping with psychological casualties, the gentler tone that tentmates use when speaking to soldiers whose mental resilience is compromised, the systematic checking that ensures psychological casualties maintain basic survival behaviors, the quiet discussions between veterans about techniques for providing support without acknowledging weakness directly, the careful redistribution of duties that accommodates reduced capability while maintaining unit effectiveness and individual dignity. Marcus explains veteran understanding of psychological breakdown phenomena that Mediterranean military service rarely encounters because normal campaigning doesn't expose soldiers to environmental stress that exceeds human psychological tolerance for extended periods without relief or recovery opportunities. Winter campaign psychological casualties differ from combat stress because environmental pressure is constant, inescapable, and personally targeted at individual psychological resilience rather than unit cohesion or tactical effectiveness. Roman military culture adapts to address psychological casualties through systematic modification of duties, expectations, and support systems that maintain unit effectiveness, while providing treatment and recovery opportunities for soldiers whose psychological capacity has been temporarily compromised by environmental stress beyond normal human tolerance. Modified duty assignments that maintain purpose while reducing stress. Increased supervision that ensures safety without compromising dignity. Medical attention that addresses psychological needs using available techniques and resources. The medical understanding of cold weather psychological breakdown incorporates systematic observation of symptoms and effective treatment methods that Roman military medicine develops through practical experience with environmental stress casualties during winter campaigns. Hypothermia affects brain function and decision-making capability. vitamin deficiencies caused by limited food variety contribute to depression and cognitive problems. Sleep deprivation caused by cold and discomfort compounds psychological stress and reduces mental resilience. Germanic winter creates psychological casualties through systematic erosion of hope, purpose, and connection to normal reality when environmental conditions make survival a constant concern that requires mental energy normally devoted to other cognitive functions, leaving insufficient psychological resources for maintaining normal personality function, emotional regulation, and social interaction that characterize healthy mental state under normal circumstances. The mind prioritizes survival over normal psychological functioning. The systematic treatment of psychological casualties involves techniques that balance individual needs with military requirements and available resources, recognizing that complete psychological recovery may not be possible under current environmental conditions, while ensuring that psychological casualties don't compromise unit effectiveness or become additional survival burdens that threaten group welfare. Gentle reintegration of psychological casualties into modified duties that provide purpose while acknowledging limitations. Protection of psychological casualties from additional stress while maintaining their connection to unit social structure and mutual support systems. Roman military ethics address psychological casualties through systematic commitment to soldier welfare that balances individual needs with unit survival requirements, recognizing that psychological casualties result from environmental conditions beyond individual control rather than personal weakness or moral failure, while ensuring that treatment of psychological casualties doesn't create incentives for malingering or compromise unit effectiveness under conditions where everyone's survival depends on collective capability and mutual support. The social impact of psychological casualties affects unit morale and individual psychological resilience as soldiers observe evidence that Germanic winter can break Roman minds as well as Roman bodies, creating anxiety about personal psychological vulnerability, while also generating increased cohesion and mutual support as healthy soldiers recognize their shared vulnerability and mutual dependence for psychological as well as physical survival under environmental conditions that test human limitations. Roman leadership techniques adapt to address psychological casualties through systematic modification of command methods, communication styles, and expectation management that account for reduced psychological capacity while maintaining military effectiveness and unit discipline necessary for survival under harsh conditions. Centurions learn to recognize psychological distress before it becomes debilitating. Officers develop techniques for providing psychological support through leadership methods that maintain authority while demonstrating care and concern for soldier welfare. The prevention of psychological breakdown involves systematic attention to factors that support mental health and psychological resilience under environmental stress, recognizing that prevention is more effective than treatment when medical resources are limited and environmental conditions continue creating psychological pressure that compromises recovery. Adequate nutrition that supports brain chemistry, sufficient rest despite challenging sleeping conditions, social support that provides emotional resources for processing stress and maintaining hope, purposeful activity that maintains sense of identity and connection to Roman military culture. The recovery process for psychological casualties requires systematic attention to rebuilding psychological capacity through graduated exposure to responsibilities and social interaction, while maintaining protective measures that prevent re-breakdown under continuing environmental stress. Slow reintegration into normal duties as psychological capacity improves. Continued monitoring to detect signs of recurring psychological problems. Modified expectations that acknowledge continuing vulnerability while encouraging recovery and return to full effectiveness when environmental conditions permit healing and psychological restoration. Roman institutional response to psychological casualties demonstrates systematic commitment to soldier welfare through development of informal but effective treatment protocols that address mental health needs, using available resources and techniques adapted from Roman medical knowledge and practical experience with environmental stress casualties, proving that Roman military culture values individual soldiers as human beings whose psychological welfare matters beyond simple military effectiveness and tactical utility. Sleep in Germanic winter becomes a negotiation between exhaustion that demands rest and environmental conditions that make unconsciousness dangerous, where the darkness brings temperatures that could kill sleeping soldiers through gradual hypothermia, while dreams transform into nightmares that blend survival anxiety with subconscious processing of daily stress from living constantly on the edge of death by freezing, starvation, or barbarian weapons that could appear without warning from forests that harbour enemies whose intimate knowledge of Germanic winter gives them overwhelming tactical advantages. Your tent mate, your tent. Quintus wakes screaming for the third time this week, thrashing against imaginary attackers in dreams that combine memories of previous battles with Germanic winter anxiety about survival in hostile territory, where every shadow could conceal Germanic warriors and every gust of wind sounds like approaching enemy forces, preparing to assault sleeping Romans who are vulnerable during the hours when bodies and minds must rest despite environmental conditions that make rest dangerous and recovery insufficient for maintaining combat effectiveness. The systematic sleep disruption affects unit effectiveness through accumulated exhaustion that reduces cognitive function, emotional regulation, and physical capability when soldiers cannot achieve the quality rest necessary for maintaining health and performance under conditions that demand maximum human capability for basic survival, let alone military effectiveness against enemies who are adapted to environmental conditions that challenge Roman advantages in organisation, equipment, and tactical training designed for Mediterranean rather than Germanic warfare conditions. Listen to the sounds that penetrate Germanic winter nights and interfere with sleep quality. The wind that never stops howling through trees with a sound like approaching enemy forces. The crack and pop of freezing wood that sounds like footsteps or weapons being prepared. The distant calls of Germanic wildlife that could mask the approach of barbarian war parties. The constant shifting and settling of tent materials as temperature changes affect fabric tension and create sounds that tired minds interpret as potential threats requiring immediate attention. Roman military medicine recognizes sleep disorders that develop during extended winter campaigns through systematic observation of symptoms and their effects on soldier performance, developing treatment methods that balance individual needs with unit effectiveness requirements, while working within resource limitations that field conditions impose on medical care. Sleep disruption caused by cold, anxiety, and environmental stress. Nightmares that blend combat memories with survival fears. Insomnia that develops when minds cannot relax sufficiently for natural sleep despite physical exhaustion that demands rest. The psychological processing that occurs during sleep becomes complicated when dreams incorporate survival anxieties, combat memories, and environmental stresses into nighttime mental activity that fails to provide the psychological restoration that normal sleep offers, instead creating additional psychological stress that compounds daytime anxiety and reduces mental resilience needed for coping with environmental challenges and potential combat situations that require clear thinking and emotional stability for effective performance and survival. Germanic winter sleep challenges require systematic adaptation of sleeping techniques, equipment usage, and social arrangements that maximize rest quality while maintaining safety and survival capability during hours when reduced consciousness creates vulnerability to environmental dangers and potential enemy action. Sleeping positions that conserve body heat while allowing rapid response to threats. Equipment arrangements that provide warmth while keeping weapons accessible. Guard rotation that ensures security while allowing adequate rest for off-duty soldiers. The tent arrangements that maximize survival during Germanic winter nights involve systematic attention to heat conservation, space utilization, and social dynamics that affect sleep quality and psychological comfort when privacy becomes impossible and personal space gets reduced to areas barely sufficient for individual sleeping, while maintaining cooperative relationships necessary for mutual survival and unit effectiveness. Shared body heat that maintains core temperature. Equipment organization that maximizes space efficiency while keeping essential items accessible. Social protocols that maintain dignity and reduce conflict when normal privacy boundaries disappear. Roman military culture adapts sleeping protocols to address Germanic winter challenges while maintaining discipline, security, and unit effectiveness necessary for survival in hostile territory. Where nighttime vulnerability requires systematic attention to defensive measures, threat assessment, and rapid response capability that balances rest needs with security requirements. Modified guard duties that account for environmental challenges to alertness and effectiveness. Communication systems that function in darkness, and weather conditions that interfere with normal security procedures. Emergency response protocols adapted for winter conditions. The dreams that Germanic winter produces reflect psychological processing of survival stress, environmental challenges, and fear about individual and unit capability for surviving conditions that test human limits while maintaining military effectiveness against enemies who possess environmental advantages that Roman training and equipment don't adequately address. Dreams about freezing to death while unable to move or call for help. Nightmares about Germanic warriors attacking during winter storms when Roman defensive advantages become compromised by environmental conditions. Anxiety dreams about equipment failure or supply shortage that results in death from exposure or starvation. Roman approaches to managing sleep disorders during winter campaigns involve systematic techniques for improving rest quality and reducing nightmare frequency, using methods that work within resource and environmental constraints while maintaining individual and unit effectiveness necessary for survival and mission accomplishment. Relaxation techniques adapted for field conditions that help reduce anxiety before sleep. Social support that provides psychological comfort during nighttime hours when isolation and vulnerability increase fear and anxiety. Physical comfort measures that improve sleep quality despite environmental challenges to normal rest. The systematic rotation of sleeping arrangements and duties ensures that sleep disruption affects unit effectiveness minimally, while providing adequate rest for individual soldiers whose psychological and physical health depends on achieving sufficient recovery during nighttime hours despite environmental conditions that challenge normal sleep patterns and quality. Fair distribution of guard duties that prevents excessive sleep deprivation for any individual soldier. Flexible sleeping arrangements that accommodate individual sleep difficulties while maintaining unit cohesion and effectiveness. Medical attention for soldiers whose sleep disorders compromise their health or effectiveness. Germanic winter teaches lessons about human sleep requirements and psychological resilience that Roman military knowledge expands through systematic observation of soldier responses to environmental challenges that test the limits of human adaptation and survival capability. Sleep becomes a survival skill that requires active management rather than passive recovery. Rest quality affects combat effectiveness more than rest quantity when environmental conditions compromise normal sleep processes. Psychological support during nighttime hours becomes essential for maintaining unit morale and individual mental health. The long-term effects of Germanic winter sleep disruption create concerns about soldier health and effectiveness that extend beyond immediate survival, to include recovery requirements and medical attention that winter campaign veterans need for returning to normal psychological and physical function after extended exposure to environmental stress that challenges human limitations and creates health problems that require systematic treatment and rehabilitation using Roman medical knowledge adapted for environmental stress casualties. The morning you discover that someone has been stealing food from the century's emergency supplies marks the moment when Germanic winter begins testing Roman military discipline against survival instincts that civilization normally keeps under control, where hunger and cold create desperation that challenges institutional loyalty when individual survival starts competing with unit welfare in the minds of soldiers whose judgment becomes compromised by environmental stress that exceeds normal human tolerance for extended periods without relief or recovery. The systematic investigation reveals that Marcus, the veteran whose survival knowledge has kept your entire contubernium alive through the worst weeks of Germanic winter, has been supplementing his rations with grain stolen from supplies designated for emergency use, when regular food distribution becomes impossible due to weather or supply line disruption. His theft threatens everyone's survival while revealing the psychological pressure that can break even experienced soldiers when environmental conditions exceed their capacity for maintaining civilized behavior under stress. Roman military justice faces unprecedented challenges when environmental conditions create survival pressure that drives normally reliable soldiers to commit acts that threaten unit survival while demonstrating the desperation that Germanic winter inflicts on human psychology and moral reasoning. Marcus isn't a coward or criminal. He's a veteran whose judgment has been compromised by survival stress that affects decision-making capability and moral reasoning in ways that Roman military law never anticipated when establishing punishment protocols for different types of military crimes. Listen to the sounds of Roman military discipline addressing crimes committed under environmental stress. The quiet discussions between centurions who must balance justice with survival necessity. The systematic investigation that determines the extent of theft and its impact on unit supplies. The careful consideration of punishment options that address wrongdoing, while maintaining unit effectiveness and individual soldier welfare under conditions where normal justice may not serve survival needs or unit cohesion. The systematic analysis of Marcus's behavior reveals environmental factors that contributed to his decision to steal from emergency supplies, providing insight into psychological breakdown mechanisms that Germanic winter triggers in human minds under survival stress that exceeds normal tolerance limits. Sleep deprivation caused by cold and anxiety affects judgment and impulse control. Nutritional deficiencies created by inadequate food supplies compromise brain chemistry that regulates moral reasoning and decision-making. Survival anxiety creates desperation that overrides normal ethical considerations and social obligations. Roman military culture must balance competing values when environmental conditions create conflicts between individual survival instincts and collective welfare requirements that normally align but diverge. When environmental pressure exceeds human psychological capacity for maintaining civilized behavior under stress that challenges basic assumptions about human nature, moral reliability, and institutional loyalty that form the foundation of Roman military effectiveness and social cohesion. The centurion's decision to impose reduced rations rather than standard punishment reflects adaptive leadership that addresses wrongdoing, while recognizing environmental factors that compromise normal decision-making capability, demonstrating Roman institutional flexibility that maintains discipline while adapting to circumstances that classical military justice never contemplated when establishing protocols for different types of military offences and their appropriate consequences under normal campaign conditions. Germanic winter creates moral dilemmas that challenge Roman ethical systems and military protocols through systematic application of survival pressure that reveals the difference between theoretical virtue and practical behaviour. When environmental conditions test human capacity for maintaining civilized standards under stress that exceeds normal tolerance limits and creates conflicts between individual survival and collective welfare that civilized society normally resolves through institutional structure and social support systems. The psychological impact of discovering theft within the unit affects morale and trust relationships that are essential for survival, under conditions where mutual dependence makes individual survival inseparable from collective welfare, creating anxiety about reliability and loyalty, while also generating understanding and sympathy for soldiers whose environmental stress has compromised their judgment and moral reasoning capability. Fear that other soldiers might also compromise unit welfare for individual survival. Recognition that environmental pressure affects everyone's psychological stability and moral reasoning. Increased vigilance that reduces trust while maintaining necessary cooperation for mutual survival. Roman approaches to preventing desperate behaviour involve systematic attention to factors that create survival stress and compromise moral reasoning, recognizing that prevention is more effective than punishment. When environmental conditions continue creating pressure that challenges human psychological resilience and decision-making capability. Adequate food distribution that reduces desperation. Fair sharing of resources and duties that maintains equity and reduces resentment. Social support that provides alternatives to desperate behaviour when individuals face survival crisis. Leadership attention that identifies developing problems before they compromise unit welfare. The systematic restoration of trust within the unit requires careful attention to rebuilding confidence in collective survival systems while acknowledging individual vulnerability to environmental pressure that can compromise moral reasoning and create desperate behaviour that threatens unit welfare. Marcus's reintegration into the unit involves modified duties that recognise his continuing value while addressing trust issues. Open discussion of survival stress and its effects on decision-making. Renewed commitment to mutual support that prevents individual desperation from compromising collective welfare. Roman military discipline adapts to address environmental stress factors that create desperate behaviour through systematic modification of justice protocols, leadership techniques, and unit management that balance individual needs with collective welfare while maintaining institutional effectiveness necessary for survival, under conditions that challenge normal assumptions about human behaviour, moral reliability, and institutional loyalty that form the foundation of Roman military culture and effectiveness. The lessons, learned from desperate behaviour under Germanic winter stress, provide insight into human nature and institutional resilience that expands Roman understanding of military psychology and leadership challenges under extreme environmental conditions. Environmental stress affects moral reasoning and decision-making capability in predictable ways that require systematic attention and prevention. Individual psychological breakdown can threaten unit welfare when survival stress exceeds human tolerance limits. Institutional flexibility and adaptive leadership become essential for maintaining effectiveness when environmental conditions challenge normal protocols and assumptions about human behaviour under stress. The long-term impact of Germanic winter discipline challenges affects Roman military culture through systematic incorporation of lessons learned about human behaviour under environmental stress that exceeds normal tolerance limits, creating modified protocols and leadership techniques that improve institutional resilience when environmental conditions challenge normal assumptions about discipline, loyalty, and collective welfare that form the foundation of Roman military effectiveness and expansion capability throughout diverse climates and geographical challenges. You wake to a sound that your mind initially refuses to recognize because it seems impossible after months of Germanic winter's relentless assault on human survival. But the gentle dripping that penetrates your tent walls represents water, returning to liquid form as temperatures finally begin their grudging retreat from the extremes that have tested Roman civilization against natural forces that seem determined to prove Mediterranean peoples inadequate for conquering territories where winter rules with absolute authority over human ambition and systematic organization. The psychological impact of hearing water drip from melting ice creates emotional responses that surprise you with their intensity, because this simple sound represents more than weather change. It represents proof that Germanic winter is not eternal, despite feeling permanent when you were living through temperatures that challenged human survival and environmental conditions that seemed designed to defeat Roman military capability through systematic application of cold, wind, and isolation from civilized support systems that maintain imperial effectiveness. Marcus sits up in his sleeping area with the careful attention of someone who has survived enough Germanic winters to recognize the significance of melting ice, while maintaining veteran caution about premature optimism. Because spring in Germania arrives gradually and unreliably, with false starts and temporary reversals that can trap unwary soldiers in fatal optimism about environmental conditions that remain dangerous, despite showing signs of improvement that create illusion of safety, where continued vigilance remains necessary for survival. Listen to the sounds of early spring beginning its assault on Germanic winter's dominance, the irregular drip of ice melting from tree branches where accumulated snow has begun surrendering to slightly warmer temperatures, the subtle change in wind patterns that carry less bite and more moisture, the distant sound of water moving in streams where ice is beginning to break up and allow liquid flow, the tentative calls of birds that have remained silent through winter months, when survival took precedence over territorial announcements and mating displays. The morning light reveals changes in the landscape that demonstrate winter's gradual retreat from total environmental control, though Germanic spring arrives with the caution of someone who understands that winter might return without warning and reclaim territories temporarily surrendered to slightly warmer temperatures. Patches of ground showing through melting snow. Ice formations that display cracks and instability where solid surfaces have begun weakening. Tree branches that no longer carry snow loads that threaten to avalanche onto unwary soldiers passing beneath. Roman military effectiveness begins adapting to seasonal changes that create new challenges and opportunities as environmental conditions shift from pure survival mode toward operational capability that enables military activities beyond basic existence. Though Germanic spring presents its own unique challenges that require modified tactics, equipment usage, and logistical planning that account for changing weather patterns, terrain conditions, and enemy activity levels that increase as environmental conditions improve. The systematic assessment of winter's impact on Roman military capability reveals both losses and gains that Germanic winter campaigns have inflicted on legion effectiveness, providing lessons about human resilience, institutional adaptation, and military innovation under environmental stress that tests imperial expansion capability in territories where climate becomes an active enemy that fights alongside barbarian resistance against Roman civilization and systematic conquest of ungoverned territories that challenge Mediterranean military assumptions. Germanic winter survival has transformed individual soldiers and unit capabilities through systematic adaptation to environmental challenges that required development of new skills, modified equipment usage, and psychological resilience that exceeds normal military training requirements. Soldiers who have learned survival techniques that supplement Roman technological advantages with primitive skills necessary when manufactured equipment proves inadequate for environmental challenges. Veterans who understand psychological stress management under conditions that test human mental resilience beyond normal limits. Units that have developed social cohesion and mutual dependence that exceeds peacetime military relationships. The equipment assessment reveals winter's systematic assault on Roman technological advantages through environmental conditions that challenge manufacturing specifications and design assumptions based on Mediterranean climate conditions rather than Germanic winter extremes that test material performance beyond normal parameters. Weapons that require replacement due to metal fatigue caused by extreme temperature variations. Armor that needs repair from damage caused by environmental stress rather than enemy action. Clothing and equipment that has been modified through field innovation and systematic adaptation to environmental challenges that standard manufacturing never anticipated. Roman military medicine has expanded through systematic treatment of environmental injuries and illnesses that Mediterranean medical training never addressed, creating new knowledge about human survival under conditions that test physiological limits and require medical intervention techniques adapted for field conditions and limited resources. Cold weather injury treatment that preserves function while preventing permanent damage. Psychological support techniques for environmental stress casualties that maintain unit effectiveness while addressing individual mental health needs. Preventive medicine that reduces illness and injury rates when environmental conditions constantly challenge human health and survival capability. The logistical lessons learned through Germanic winter campaigns provide insight into supply system adaptation and resource management under conditions that challenge normal Roman administrative efficiency and systematic organization through environmental factors that interfere with transportation, storage, and distribution of materials necessary for maintaining army effectiveness in hostile territory. Modified supply schedules that account for weather-related transportation challenges. Resource conservation techniques that extend supply effectiveness when resupply becomes difficult or impossible. Alternative procurement methods that supplement standard logistics with local resource exploitation and systematic adaptation to environmental limitations. Germanic winter has tested Roman institutional resilience through systematic pressure that revealed both strengths and weaknesses in imperial military culture, organizational systems, and expansion methodology when applied to territories where environmental conditions actively oppose Roman presence and create survival challenges that require adaptation beyond normal military training and preparation. Institutional flexibility that enables adaptation without abandoning Roman identity and systematic advantages. Leadership development that produces officers capable of maintaining effectiveness under conditions that challenge normal command protocols. Military innovation that improves capability through systematic incorporation of lessons learned under environmental stress. The psychological transformation of soldiers who have survived Germanic winter creates veteran capabilities that exceed normal military effectiveness through development of resilience, adaptability, and survival skills that supplement standard training with practical knowledge gained through environmental challenges that test human limits and reveal individual and collective capability for overcoming obstacles that would defeat less systematically organized and disciplined military forces. Confidence that comes from surviving conditions that seemed impossible. Adaptability that enables effective response to unexpected challenges. Brotherhood bonds that create mutual support networks exceeding normal military relationships. Roman military effectiveness emerges from Germanic winter testing stronger and more adaptable despite losses in personnel and equipment that environmental conditions imposed through systematic assault on imperial expansion capability, proving that Roman institutional systems and cultural values can triumph over environmental challenges that would defeat less organized and systematic civilizations through superior adaptation, innovation, and collective determination that transforms obstacle into opportunity for demonstrating imperial resilience and expansion capability. The gradual warming of Germanic spring affects human psychology in ways that parallel the physical thawing of frozen landscape, where mental processes that have been compressed and slowed by months of survival-focused thinking begin expanding toward more complex cognitive functions that include planning beyond immediate survival needs, emotional processing of winter experiences, and restoration of psychological capabilities that environmental stress had forced into hibernation-like conservation mode necessary for maintaining basic mental function under conditions that exceeded normal human tolerance. Your own mental state undergoes systematic transformation as environmental pressure decreases, and survival anxiety begins releasing its grip on cognitive resources that can now be allocated to activities beyond basic existence, allowing psychological recovery that reveals how thoroughly Germanic winter had compressed your mental life into narrow focus on immediate survival requirements while suppressing emotional processes, creative thinking, and social interactions that characterize normal human psychological function under less threatening environmental conditions. Marcus demonstrates veteran understanding of psychological recovery processes that occur when environmental stress decreases sufficiently to allow mental expansion beyond pure survival mode, though he warns against premature psychological relaxation when Germanic conditions remain potentially dangerous despite improvement that creates illusion of safety where continued vigilance remains necessary for actual survival and military effectiveness. The mind wants to celebrate winter's retreat, but Germanic spring remains unpredictable and potentially lethal for soldiers who abandon systematic caution too quickly. Listen to the sounds of Roman psychological recovery beginning as environmental pressure decreases, conversations that include topics beyond immediate survival needs for the first time in months, laughter that indicates renewed capacity for finding humour in situations that previously demanded only grim determination, the systematic discussion of plans and possibilities that extend beyond basic existence to include military objectives and personal goals that winter survival requirements had made impossible to contemplate seriously. The restoration of emotional capacity that survival stress had suppressed reveals the psychological cost of Germanic winter survival through systematic recognition of feelings, memories and mental processes that environmental pressure had forced into suspension, while cognitive resources focused exclusively on immediate survival needs. Grief for comrades lost to environmental conditions rather than enemy action. Anger about institutional decisions that expose soldiers to conditions beyond reasonable military requirements. Fear about psychological and physical damage that winter inflicted despite successful survival. Roman military culture must adapt to address psychological recovery needs that differ from normal post-campaign adjustment because Germanic winter created environmental stress casualties that require different treatment approaches than combat trauma, involving systematic attention to rebuilding psychological capacity while maintaining military effectiveness and unit cohesion necessary for continued operations in territory that remains hostile despite improving environmental conditions that reduce but don't eliminate survival challenges and military threats. The systematic assessment of psychological damage reveals winter's impact on cognitive function, emotional regulation, and social capabilities that environmental stress compromised through months of survival pressure that forced mental resources into narrow focus on immediate needs while suspending psychological processes that support normal human function, creativity, and interpersonal relationships that characterize healthy mental state under less threatening conditions that allow psychological growth and development rather than pure survival conservation. Germanic winter's psychological legacy includes both damage and growth, as soldiers discover mental resilience and survival capabilities they never knew they possessed, while also recognizing psychological costs that environmental stress inflicted through systematic pressure that tested human limits and revealed individual and collective capacity for maintaining function under conditions that challenge basic assumptions about human psychological resilience and institutional capability for supporting individual mental health under extreme environmental stress. The recovery of social capabilities that survival stress had compressed into essential cooperation reveals how thoroughly their Germanic winter affected interpersonal relationships and social interaction patterns that support unit cohesion, individual psychological health, and collective effectiveness under normal military conditions. Renewed capacity for friendship beyond survival partnership. Restoration of individual personality traits that environmental pressure had suppressed in favor of survival-focused behavior. Recovery of social humor, cultural activities, and interpersonal dynamics that create psychological comfort and unit morale. Roman approaches to psychological recovery involve systematic attention to rebuilding mental health and emotional capacity while maintaining military effectiveness and continued readiness for operations that may require full psychological function for tactical success and individual survival under conditions that continue challenging human capability despite environmental improvement that reduces but doesn't eliminate threats to Roman military effectiveness and soldier welfare in hostile Germanic territory. The systematic restoration of cognitive complexity that survival stress had simplified into basic decision-making processes reveals winter's impact on an intellectual function and mental agility that environmental pressure reduced to essential survival thinking, while suppressing creative problem-solving, strategic planning, and analytical capabilities that support military effectiveness and individual development under normal conditions that allow intellectual growth and systematic learning rather than pure survival conservation. Germanic winter teaches lessons about human psychological resilience and institutional support requirements for maintaining mental health under environmental stress that exceeds normal tolerance limits, providing insight into factors that support psychological survival while revealing vulnerabilities that require systematic attention and institutional protection when environmental conditions challenge human mental capacity and emotional stability through persistent pressure that tests psychological limits and reveals individual and collective capability for maintaining civilized behavior under uncivilized conditions. The psychological transformation that results from surviving Germanic winter creates veteran mental capabilities that include enhanced resilience, improved stress tolerance, and expanded survival skills, while also revealing psychological vulnerabilities and recovery needs that require systematic attention for maintaining long-term mental health and a military effectiveness after exposure to environmental stress, and that challenged human psychological limits and created mental changes that persist beyond immediate environmental challenges and affect individual and unit capability. Roman military psychology expands through systematic observation of environmental stress effects and recovery processes that provide new understanding of human mental resilience and institutional requirements for supporting psychological health under conditions that challenge normal assumptions about human capability, mental stability, and institutional effectiveness when environmental factors create stress that exceeds normal military training and preparation for psychological challenges that accompany extreme environmental conditions and survival requirements. The integration of psychological lessons learned through Germanic winter experience into Roman military knowledge creates improved understanding of human mental capability and institutional support requirements that enhance military effectiveness through better preparation for environmental challenges, improved support systems for psychological casualties, and systematic attention to mental health factors that affect individual and unit capability under conditions that test human limits and reveal psychological requirements for maintaining effectiveness when environmental conditions challenge civilized assumptions about human nature and institutional resilience. The systematic preparation for eventual return to Roman territory begins with psychological adjustment to the concept that Germanic winter survival represents temporary hardship rather than permanent life change. Though the transformation that environmental stress has created in individual soldiers and unit capabilities means that return to Mediterranean conditions will require its own adaptation process as bodies and minds readjust to climates and conditions that no longer feel natural after months of systematic adaptation to Germanic environmental challenges that have become normal despite their extremity. Your equipment requires systematic assessment and replacement to restore military effectiveness standards that Germanic winter compromised through environmental stress that tested material performance beyond design specifications, revealing both strengths and weaknesses in Roman manufacturing and equipment design that provide lessons for improving military capability in future campaigns that may encounter similar environmental challenges, requiring technological adaptation and systematic modification of standard equipment specifications. Marcus organizes gear inventory with veteran attention to distinguishing between equipment that can be restored to functional effectiveness and items that require replacement due to environmental damage that compromises performance beyond field repair capability, demonstrating systematic approach to equipment management that balances resource conservation with safety requirements that ensure soldier effectiveness during continued operations and eventual return march through territory that remains potentially hostile despite improving environmental conditions. Listen to the sounds of Roman military preparation for seasonal transition, the systematic inspection and maintenance of equipment that has survived Germanic winter testing, the organized discussion of supply requirements and replacement needs that environmental conditions created, the planning conversations about logistics and operational requirements for continued military activity in territory that presents different challenges as environmental conditions change from pure survival mode toward normal campaign operations. The restoration of Roman military standards requires systematic attention to discipline, appearance, and operational capability that environmental survival necessities had modified for Germanic conditions, involving gradual transition from survival-focused military culture towards standard Roman military effectiveness, while maintaining lessons learned and capabilities developed through environmental adaptation that provide advantages for continued operations in challenging territory that requires both Roman systematic organization and Germanic survival skills. Roman military medicine addresses recovery requirements for soldiers whose health and capability have been affected by environmental stress that tested human physiological limits and created medical conditions that require systematic treatment and rehabilitation, using knowledge gained through winter campaign experience about cold weather injuries, environmental stress effects and recovery processes that restore normal function after exposure to conditions that challenged human survival capability and created health problems requiring medical intervention. The psychological preparation for return to Roman civilization involves systematic adjustment to the reality that Germanic winter experience has created mental and emotional changes that affect how soldiers relate to normal Roman life and Mediterranean conditions that may seem strange and unfamiliar after months of adaptation to environmental extremes that require different psychological approaches and survival mindsets that may not easily readjust to peacetime conditions and civilian life expectations. Germanic territory. Knowledge gained through winter survival experience provides military intelligence about environmental conditions, local resources, and survival techniques that enhance Roman capability for future operations in similar climates, while also revealing Germanic tribal capabilities and environmental advantages that require systematic counter-strategies and improved preparation for military operations in territories where environmental conditions favour indigenous populations and challenge Roman technological and organisational advantage. The systematic documentation of lessons learned through Germanic winter campaigns creates institutional knowledge that improves Roman military effectiveness for future environmental challenges through recorded experience about equipment performance, tactical modifications, medical requirements, and psychological factors that affect military capability under extreme environmental conditions, requiring adaptation beyond standard military training and preparation that assumes Mediterranean climate conditions and civilized operational environments. Roman logistical planning for return march addresses supply requirements, transportation challenges, and operational needs for movement through Germanic territory under changing environmental conditions that create different challenges than pure winter survival, while maintaining capability for military operations against Germanic tribes whose activity levels increase as environmental conditions improve and seasonal campaigning becomes possible again for both Roman and barbarian military forces. The restoration of communication with other Roman military units and imperial administration requires systematic re-establishment of information networks that Germanic winter conditions had disrupted through weather interference with normal military communication systems, involving coordination of intelligence about local conditions, military situation, and operational requirements that enable effective decision-making about continued Germanic operations and eventual return to Roman territory. Roman unit cohesion that developed through winter survival experience creates military capability that exceeds normal training, effectiveness through bonds and mutual trust that environmental stress testing created between soldiers who learned complete interdependence for survival under conditions that revealed individual and collective capabilities that peacetime military service rarely develops, providing enhanced unit effectiveness that represents institutional gain despite individual and material losses that environmental conditions imposed. The strategic assessment of Roman position in Germania after winter survival reveals both challenges and opportunities that seasonal change creates for continued military operations against Germanic tribes who have also survived environmental conditions that tested their capability while providing insight into the barbarian strengths and weaknesses that winter observation revealed about indigenous survival techniques, military capabilities, and territorial knowledge that affects tactical planning for future operations. Roman imperial policy regarding Germanic campaigns requires systematic evaluation based on knowledge gained through winter experience about environmental challenges, military requirements, and costs associated with maintaining Roman military effectiveness in territories where climate creates constant challenges that require resources, adaptation, and institutional flexibility that may exceed benefits of territorial conquest depending on strategic objectives and imperial priorities that balance expansion goals against practical limitations and resource requirements. The legacy of Germanic winter survival extends beyond immediate military objectives to include institutional knowledge, individual capabilities, and collective experience that enhance Roman military effectiveness and imperial expansion capability through systematic incorporation of environmental adaptation techniques, survival skills, and resilience capabilities that improve Roman ability to project power into territories where environmental conditions challenge Mediterranean assumptions about climate, terrain, and operational requirements for maintaining military effectiveness under diverse environmental conditions throughout the expanding empire. Epilogue: The Eternal Lessons of Germanic Winter. As you prepare for whatever lies ahead, whether continued campaigning in Germanic territory or eventual return to the warmth and civilization of Roman lands, you carry within yourself the knowledge that survival under impossible conditions requires more than individual strength or courage. It demands systematic cooperation, institutional flexibility, and the kind of collective determination that transforms groups of individuals into something greater than the sum of their parts. The lessons carved into your memory by Germanic winter extend far beyond military applications or survival techniques. You have learned that human resilience has depth that peacetime never reveals, that civilization's greatest strength lies not in avoiding hardship but in systematically reducing hardship to manageable components, and that Roman greatness comes not from superior climate or abundant resources, but from institutional determination to march forward regardless of obstacles. Germanic winter tested every aspect of Roman military culture and found it capable of adaptation without abandonment of core principles. Engineering solutions emerged for problems that seemed insurmountable. Logistical systems functioned despite disruption that would cripple less organized forces. Medical knowledge expanded to address challenges that classical training never anticipated. Leadership techniques evolved to maintain effectiveness under conditions that tested institutional assumptions about human capability and military organization. Most importantly, you discovered that Roman identity survives environmental challenges that would break lesser civilizations, not through rigid adherence to inappropriate methods, but through systematic adaptation that preserves essential Roman characteristics while incorporating whatever local knowledge and environmental techniques improve effectiveness and survival capability. Romans remain Roman not by rejecting foreign influence, but by systematically evaluating and adopting whatever works, while maintaining institutional identity and organizational superiority. The Germanic forests that once seemed designed purely to defeat Roman ambitions now represent conquered territory in a different sense, not through military occupation, but through proof that Roman systematic thinking and collective discipline can triumph over natural forces that challenge human civilization itself. Winter was another enemy, and Romans adapted to defeat it through the same methodical approach that built roads across mountain ranges and aqueduct systems that still function centuries later. As the eternal Roman march continues, carrying civilization to places that may not want it but will receive it nonetheless, you understand that Germanic winter was not an obstacle to Roman expansion, but a test of Roman capability that revealed institutional strengths and individual resilience that ensure the empire's continued growth through whatever environmental or human challenges future campaigns may encounter. The march goes on, one step at a time, through whatever seasons may come.